The process of doing your second I think something that's enormously fun.
All right, folks, let's get this party started. So, here's what we're doing today. I kind of started this this little format the other week, and so we're going to continue it this week. I'm going to start with a little bit of news, just till we get get people in the chat, and once we get people in the chat, then I'm going to transition to the main topic, and then I'll field questions. And then I'll end with like a weekly argumentation section. I think today I'm going to talk about convexity and what convexity means and how to be aware of it. Just so you all are aware, chat started like yesterday on this video, but YouTube will discard chats that are done really far in advance, and I don't really know why that is. But lots of people were in here chatting with me the other afternoon when I actually set the video up. So be aware that if you're asking a question like a day in advance on the actual video chat, I'm not going to see it because it's going to disappear by the time I get to the video when I actually really need to look at it. So that's something that y'all probably need to be aware of. Little bit of channel news. I've been very busy. Obviously, the baby turned 1 month old this week, so she's going to be 1 month and 1 week on Tuesday, I think, Monday or Tuesday. So 5 weeks, which is good. She's doing great. Been pretty busy because she's got like a baby reflux thing, which means essentially she has to be held like 24/7. So that's impacted a little bit like my productivity. I've written like a whopping like 8,000 words or something since she was born, which is very low for me. But it keeps you more focused. Like the less time you have, the better able you are to just focus in on whatever you're doing when it's time to do the work. So being able to sit down and just work, I've been able to write probably more efficiently, even though I've had far less time. And I've noticed this for a couple of years now. As I've gotten more busy, I actually get more and more efficient with everything I'm doing because the focus has to occur in a much more. You just have to be more focused all the time with whatever you're doing. You have to focus like a laser on your current task. So when I had nothing at all to do all day, like I could write like 5,000 words a day. But if you consider that, I would write like 2,500 to 3,000 words a day and only have like 2 hours to write it. By comparison, it's a lot more efficient, right? So that is something that happens when you're a little bit busier, as you tend to get more efficient with what you're doing. The main thing I'm trying to do is just, stay productive every day. Have something that I do every day, either a short video or, work on my current story, which is a sci-fi horror story. It's really sci-fi horror and space opera because it's got some superpowers and that kind of stuff. But we'll see how that one turns out. You'll be able to read it for free if you are on the Subscribe Star page. Patreon page is gone. I know some people haven't abandoned Patreon yet. I think it's kind of a sinking ship. So we'll see how that one goes. But anyway, I do appreciate all the donations on Subscribe Star and elsewhere, and I do appreciate when people buy the book. So today, what I wanted to talk about was characters that suck. And so, the video thumbnail is of Rey Johnson. And I want to explain the context of this if you guys don't follow me on Twitter. So if you'll allow me to, let me see if I can pull this up here. Here it is. Okay. So Mary Sue, no, it's actually a Rey Johnson. So this is something I want to explain. And again, it's another little logic thing. So Robert Cargyle on Twitter said, Mary Sue is a term that gets abused as women who does something unexpectedly awesome when it specifically means character who never fails when trying and is always better than all the other exceptional characters around them. So that explains, that describes Rey to a T. This is what Rey Johnson said. It is impossible to separate the term from its bad faith use. The term itself is rooted in sexist bullshit. It needs to die. Now, the thing is that it has not in any way had any kind of bad faith use at all. So no one's ever used this term in bad faith. This is a means of trying to, rather than defend what you did, saying, no, I don't think she's a Mary Sue, because they did that for like a year and a half, like 3 years starting Force Awakens, rather than saying, no, she's not a Mary Sue. Now it's like, you can't call her a Mary Sue because that term is sexist, and you can't separate its sexism from its other connotations, similar like racial slurs and things like that, or using the word retarded, even though that's like a specific piece of medical terminology, right? Which means slowed. We use it in music all the time too. So this is a bit of a thought policing attempt to remove criticism. Like if people will use Mary Sue, now they're sexist. I'm like, okay, you got it, Ryan. Rey Johnson, you got it. So I am officially renaming Mary Sue to Rey Johnson. That is what it's going to be called from here on out. I'll use this term in good faith 100% of the time, just as I used Mary Sue in good faith 100% of the time. The key example is the character Rey. We'll just name it after the character Rey from Star Wars because she's the perfect example. She's superior to every character around her, both morally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. She has powers that she wouldn't otherwise know. For instance, she's able to do a Jedi mind trick, having never seen it demonstrated before. She's able to beat expert swordsmen fully powered by the Force without ever having trained with a lightsaber or indeed having learned about the Force only hours beforehand. She's able to defeat Luke Skywalker, the hero of the galaxy and one of the greatest warriors of the previous generation, really the person in whose mind all of the knowledge of the Force after the fall of the Jedi and the Sith remains. She's able to defeat him quite easily. She's able to knock him down and overcome the master of the Force, if you will. She's able to fly. She's able to fly the Millennium Falcon after it's been dead for 20 years, better than the guy who owned it for decades and maintained it himself. She also knows better how to fix the Millennium Falcon than Han Solo, the man who knows how to do it. Every single scene is set up to show how awesome she is. So from now on, The term isn't Mary Sue, it's Rey Johnson. So I wanted to talk about just some characters in books and movies that have a lot to do with Rey Johnsons in different forms, and also other kinds of characters that suck in addition to Rey Johnsons, because you can have a Rey Johnson, or you can have a Ruin Johnson. You know, Ruin Johnson would be somebody who's pathetic and horrible. So we can just name the character that has no redeeming qualities after Rian, if you want. Or I would say a Ruin Johnson is when you intentionally destroy a story, which is the example of The Last Jedi. Because The Last Jedi, in context, why people hate it so much is because not only was it not a good movie, as I explained, but in relationship to all those other Star Wars movies, it like spits on and destroys the legacy of everything that came before it. So that would probably be a Ruin Johnson. Let me go ahead and let's take a look at some of the chat before I get to listing a couple of other examples that I have in mind. And then maybe we can go from there. All right, I tend to go back up to the top and look at stuff here. Show drink. I have a Rockstar and a Coke Zero. This one I was already drinking to try to wake up because I didn't sleep much last night. Took a nap. That was a bad idea. So there you go. Will this stream video be posted on your YouTube to look back to? Yes, all of them are. Geekdom. Hey, David, one of my friends told me he feels Aragorn in Lord of the Rings is a Gary Stu because he's too heroic. But heroism means being a leader, and he's shown that much more than Rey. I think, so there's two different Aragorns you can look at. There's Aragorn in the movies, and there's Aragorn in the books. And neither one is a Mary Sue, or sorry, neither one is a Rey Johnson. But they're different in different ways. So the character in the books, really, Aragorn is really closer to a paragon. He's very much on the edge of being fully developed. So in the books, he's ready to be king. He's very ready to take up his mantle and take up the throne and become the king of men. He feels he is like 87 years old, and because he comes from a line that's been mingled with elves and Maiar, he's exceptionally long-lived. He lives to be over 200, I think. But somebody here is probably even more knowledgeable and knows exactly how old he lived. And he chose to die, which was like traditional for his ancestors. So rather than becoming really old and withered and dying of like heart disease, he like laid down and went to sleep and died intentionally and left his kingdom to his son, which was what they did in Numenor. Anyway, so in the books, he's very ready to take up the mantle. He's very much already primed to be a leader. He's an alpha. And in the movies, he's a little bit more reluctant. And that is, I think, a choice that Peter Jackson made to humanize him a little bit more and make him a little bit more relatable. Rather than him being a purely heroic figure that's admirable, he's a figure that has doubts. And of course, in the movies, he fails more often than he does in the books. And there's several moments where he has this despair where he's like, we've sent them to their death, or like, he's afraid to take up his to take up his mantle and go like get the dead. And there's moments where he cries. There's lots of things like that. He's very, very far from a Mary Sue. Not only that, but the other characters around him don't love him or respect him immediately. He has conflicts with Boromir, who's technically a countryman of his and kin. He has conflicts with Éomer. He doesn't have too many clashes with Gandalf, but Gandalf really kind of treats him as an equal, which is a cue that he's really more of a paragon character. He's a leader. He's a fully developed character. Most of his development has taken place in the past. It doesn't happen on the journey. The hero's journey in Lord of the Rings is more Frodo and Sam, and not so much. And some people would argue it's Sam more than Frodo, and I think that could be very well argued, but really no, he's not a Mary Sue. Not only that, he's not limitless in his potential and his ability. He spends far too much time running away from orcs and not enough time chopping them to bits for him to be like a Mary Sue. So the way a Mary Sue ends up happening is where you take a confident, heroic character like Aragorn, and what you do is you remove from him the things which justify his competence. So the fact that he's old, the fact that he's experienced, the fact that he's been living out in the wilds for 90 years. You remove that. So if we look at Rey Johnson, or Rey from Star Wars as an example, she's a young woman. She's 18. Her survival skills may be good because she lives on Jakku or something, but it's unlikely that she would possess the actual leadership qualities of somebody who's been the leader of the Rangers for like 70 years or something, right? And has fought multiple wars, things like that. And some of that stuff is revealed in the movies where it's not obvious in the book, where he says, Eowyn says, like, my father said that he remembers going to war to you. He's like, oh yeah, he remembers you going to this war. And he's like, yeah, it's good he has a good memory. He was only a small child. It's like, well, how old are you? And he says, I'm 87. Meaning he'd fought in these wars multiple times. He's an extremely experienced thing. Aragorn's closer to Yoda, right? Even though he looks just like a middle-aged man, he's really closer to Yoda. Now, this is something about heroism that I want to make a point about. So people who are not very moved by heroism, or haven't seen it much, or don't really believe it exists in the world. So if you're kind of a nihilist and you think everybody's pathetic, or if you're a pathetic person and you tend to project your feelings about yourself onto the world, like the world is full of pathetic, small, unheroic people, then you're not really going to believe that other people are heroes. That's something that I notice. So if you hear people talk about gamma males, or sometimes beta males, but usually it's gamma males, omega males, these are guys who resent people's social standing and don't understand why they have it. So they don't understand why people like the alpha. They don't understand why people like Aragorn. Well, Aragorn is somebody who took a lot of risks and has inherited the results of those risks. It's not like he hasn't ever fought in a war. Luke Skywalker is somebody who took a lot of risks and has inherited those risks. So if you tend to look upon them and don't believe them, it's because you're projecting your own life, which is full of cowardice and pathos, onto other characters, where regular people who have taken a lot of risks can admire somebody who's taken lots of risks. It's why people like Donald Trump. It's why a lot of people don't get why people like Donald Trump. It's because Donald Trump has taken a lot of risks. The fact that he lost $1 billion of his own money doesn't make him a bad businessman. It makes him a better businessman because he took all the risks to lose it. It was his money to lose, and he made it back. A lot of people miss that. Let me check this super chat from Sheng Long. Always enjoy your content. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that, and I try to do a good job with it. I will talk about convexity today and how that relates to content for anybody that's maybe trying to start up a YouTube channel, and some thoughts about that and my experience with it. So thank you, Geekdom, for the question. That's a really good one, because people debate, like, what does make a Rey Johnson character? Is it just the fact that they're hyper competent? It's like, no, it's that, but they're missing the reasons that they would be, and they're also liked. And the plot tends to revolve around their abilities. It sets up obstacles that they're destined to knock down. A really more aggressive Mary Sue would be one where, like, she's an expert in biochemistry, and then there's a plot point that requires her knowledge of biochemistry. You go through it like that. Also an author insert. And I kind of felt that way. I felt she was more of an author insert in Force Awakens than in the second one, in The Last Jedi. But in The Last Jedi, she's definitely super overcompetent and has no reason to be. Let's keep going. Do you think the problem with the characters in Star Trek is they made Finn the everyman figure when Rey is supposed to be the everyman or everywoman figure? Yeah, Finn shouldn't be. Yeah, he's supposed to have PTSD. Like, he was a big missed opportunity. Because the first 30 minutes of Force Awakens, I was really primed for a good movie. I thought they introduced a bunch of things that were cool, like a stormtrooper who wants to leave the First Order or whatever it's called. And you have some abandoned orphan. Like, they're kind of blank slates. They could do. I mean, the orphan is a blank slate. You could do anything with it. The Finn could be a really big redemptive character. I thought he would be like the bad boy or something, but they tried to make him the everyman, and it just doesn't work, because if you're raised from birth and given a number to be serving some evil empire, you're not an everyman by definition. You're just you're just a soldier, a bitter soldier. That's what they should have gone with him. He should have been like a bitter soldier. Geekdom, thanks for answering. Do you think having them change Rey into being Luke's daughter, which is rumored for 9, will fix the Mary Sue problem, or be a cheap reactionary decision to fan backlash from 8? So, back when Episode 7 came out, that was one of the big speculations that I saw a lot of, was that she would be revealed to be Luke's daughter. She was put on Jakku, but like something happened where her mother died and Luke never came and got her because he was disconnected from the Force. And so that's the thing that I'm gonna go with, is probably what they're gonna do. So I think it would be wise for them to do that, because I think it would, in context, fix a lot of those problems. I don't think it would make Episode 8 into a good movie, because it's a bad movie on a technical level. I also think Episode 7 is a bad movie on a technical level too. The way they're constructed it doesn't work, right? Episode 7, so I tweeted this out and people didn't really get the tweet, and I shouldn't say that. Everybody who got the tweet got it. And the people who had bad reading comprehension didn't get it. But I said, you can see a point in the movie where the plot changes, where like the studio exerts control in what the movie's doing. Because the Episode 7, it starts with this: we got to find Luke Skywalker to save the Republic. That's the the MacGuffin. That's the plot goal. We got to go get Luke. And so that quickly gets abandoned after Han Solo sucks up the Millennium Falcon. So up to the point where they escape on the Millennium Falcon and Han sucks them up, it was about finding Luke, and that's where the direction of the plot was going. That's where they were going. And then it just changes to another plot about this new Death Star blowing up the Republic. And you're kind of like, well, why did they just change plots? They changed plots because if they had gone to get Luke, then focus would have been on Luke. And I do think JJ said this in an interview. Originally, we were going to have them team up, and then we decided it was going to be the focus on Rey. So I looked at that as, you can kind of see where that influence is put in. They had started making the movie, and they had to change what the movie was about halfway through. So you have 2 movies in Force Awakens. You have one, which is this trying to find Luke. That's up to where you get to Han Solo. And then you have a second movie, which is everything after that, which is destroy the new Death Star. And that's when it really starts to go bonkers, is after they abandon that initial plot goal. Even though it's a simple MacGuffin, right? Like, we got to go find this guy. It's very similar to the very first movie, but different enough they probably could have done lots of cool stuff with it. But after that, they just kind of relied on trying to stuff in older nostalgic tropes, including Jedi mind tricks out of nowhere and other kind of ridiculous things. Psychic lightsabers that should have been dust falling into Cloud City. Although I think there was an EU novel where they like cloned Luke from like the hand that got chopped off. I don't remember exactly. From Dimension 35, $20. I really appreciate that. Thank you. I don't know what R means. I'm guessing that's your country. I don't know what country R is. Book Aragorn already went through his personal journey. We see him after he has already dealt with his feelings towards Arwen and the burdens of kingship. The movies chose to show us him going through this personal conflicts. Yes, absolutely correct. I agree. They also do flashbacks where, like, he's telling Arwen, like, we got to break up because you're an elf and I'm a human. And she's like, I choose a mortal life. And then there's just, they pull a lot of stuff from, like, the appendices in to make Arwen's character a thing in the movies. Which is fine. I feel it's slightly out of place. But it doesn't make the movies bad, and it does humanize Aragorn, and it also makes Arwen more of a character because they were so light on female characters. They wanted to have some. $10 from Shenlong, thank you. Late to chat may have been answered. Do you think Palpatine will actually be in the movie, a flashback or a video recording? Laughter in the trailer mainly marketing, or will he actually play a role? I don't know. So one fan theory I've seen is that Palpatine is like possessing Darth Vader's helmet. Like somehow Kylo has Darth Vader's helmet and is like praying to Darth Vader, but they're like, no, he's actually praying to Darth Sidious. That's interesting. I think what they will probably do is have a Force Ghost Palpatine on some level. So Force Ghost Palpatine, you know, when he talks about overcoming death itself, that's probably what he meant, which is maybe like a path that was, you know, put off to the dark side. Like the dark side couldn't become Force Ghosts, was like an old lore thing. Though I do think in the EU they had Palpatine like possess the body of a stormtrooper and continue living, which is kind of a cop out to me. I didn't like that particular thing, but it could be that, right? It could be he's lived on in possession of another body, or he's a Force ghost, and that's part of his like thing from the prequels where he says there's paths that will allow you to overcome death itself. So maybe the path thinks it's the dark side thinks it's like an esoteric knowledge thing to be a Force ghost, but the light side knows it's just exoteric. It's just a known thing. So we'll probably see. I think they'll probably have him play a role because they killed Snoke, so they killed the main bad guy. That we need another bad guy for Kylo to have some kind of redemption. So that's what I think. That's what I think we'll get. Oh, another $5 from Sir Tremendous. Oh, €5. Thank you. I appreciate that. No chat on it, but I really do appreciate it. So yeah, let's keep going on. Geekdom says, I love Aragorn. I think he's different than Frodo as a protagonist. Yeah, he's a heroic character. So if you're a person, I mentioned this, if you're a person who likes heroism, then heroic characters are enjoyable. I love characters like Conan. I love really heroic characters. They're not Mary Sue's because they're heroic. This was an argument that lots of SGWs on my channel would come by when I very clearly explain why Rey was a great example of a Mary Sue. You rarely get them in big name, big time fiction. It's like, oh well, you're just saying that because she's a woman, right? And she does all these things that the male characters did before. It's like, that's not true, right? Like you don't see, Kyle from the first Terminator movie is not a Mary Sue, even though he's a highly competent warrior. Well, he lives, first of all, he's a middle-aged person. He's a full adult, right? And he also lives in a horrible environment where he's been a soldier since birth. And he's still not that confident, and he gets killed at the end, right? So whenever you have these heroic male characters, they always have like some really large thing like this. It used to be a joke that the good guy always gets really beat up by the bad guy at the end of the movie, before he's able to finally kill the bad guy. Die Hard is Lieutenant John McClane a Mary Sue? No, I mean, like if he was, he probably wouldn't have ended up as bad as he was, or he wouldn't have been hiding as much. He was hated by most of the people, right? Like, so they used it they used him as an interesting foil for like the police force, which didn't like that he was acting on his own, that sort of thing. So no, most of those characters are not Mary Sue's. I'll talk about some other Rey Johnsons in a minute. Need to get used to using the correct term now. In honor of Rey Johnson and his, of course, great argument that the term used to criticize him and his franchise is sexist, we will rename it Rey Johnson. Geekdom says Rey Johnson needs to stop talking. I will say this about J.J. Abrams. J.J. Abrams he's just way nicer. He doesn't do all this public facing bitching. So I can see why lots of people still like J.J. Abrams. He's just not. He's not as much of a jerk. Jared says they could have given Rey a friend on Jakku, and when they converse, things are revealed about her. Shows her ability to pilot and fix things before she's on the Falcon. Yeah, so this is another thing too, is like every time she does something, it's like then they have to explain it. So this is a thing in Force Awakens. Every time something happens, they're kind of backpedaling. Everything's like a solution to a problem, because they don't know they didn't construct the plot ahead of time, is really what happened. They were kind of flying by the seat of their pants. You can kind of tell. So it's like, okay, where'd you learn to fly this? Simulations. How'd you learn to fix this? I'm a scrapper, right? And I know this stuff, I guess. How do we get through the shields? We're going to light speed through them. You know, everything is like a weird solution to a plot obstacle that they just concocted. So they concocted a plot obstacle. It's like, oh yeah, okay, we got to blow up the Death Star, so we got to disable this. It's like, but how are we going to get through the shields? And it's like, let's just come up with some jargon explanation, right? We'll light speed through them. And they did the same thing in Last Jedi. It's like, we got to go get these codes. And so we can't light speed away from the fleet or they'll follow us. So they light speed away to go get a code breaker. It's like, no one was checking this. Like, no one was saying, you know, Rian, you probably can't have, if your whole conflict setup is they can't light speed away, you probably couldn't have one ship light speed away to fix things. And then also not actually fix anything. Jared says it could be similar to how we hear things about Luke being a good pilot before he flies an X-Wing at the end of the film. Yeah, it's true. He says, yeah, I'm not such a bad pilot myself. And we know he wants to go to the academy. You know, we know he wants to do all those things. He really wanted to join the Empire, but I think that didn't end up making it into the movie. But I've heard Mark Hamill talk about it several times. Rey Johnson is fantastic and fits. Yeah, thank you. Star Wars is in complete shambles from Crazy Chameleon. So watch Cobra Kai instead. It's available on YouTube if you want to check it out. I'm not interested in that. I haven't watched it, and I probably won't. And it's okay if you like it, but it doesn't appeal to me. It's not my thing. Don't be upset about it. Whoa, there's so much chat that I missed. Oh, wow. Let me, before I get to even more chat, let me talk about some other examples. So one of the things about Rey Johnson type characters is they rarely make it into film. And the reason they rarely make it into film is when you're making a movie, you have so many people that are involved, and there's so much money involved, and there's so much oversight with a typical movie that it's pretty rare for there not to be a significant amount of script doctoring on some level or rewrites. It's not untypical for a script in Hollywood to be rewritten more than 15 times, meaning you'll have the original person who write it revise it. You'll hand it to another writer to rewrite it and hand it to another writer until like the producers feel that it's where it needs to be to actually do it. Now, I actually have problems with that amount of rewriting because I think it produces worse movies than if they had like made the rough draft in most cases. Because I've and you asked me how I know this. I've read a lot of rough drafts of these movies. At one point, you know, I had some friends that were in the business, and there's a great big Google Drive that a lot of people have access to that has all these scripts. And that's how I got the original rough draft for Star Wars. If you guys haven't read that, I can try to put it up somewhere for you guys to check out. I definitely recommend reading the rough draft of Star Wars. It's a very, very cool script. And you can see all of the seeds of all 6 movies in that script. But you can read the rough draft and watch the final movie and see the difference, because things change when you're filming it. Things change in a scene. You may ask for a rewritten scene because you don't like the dialogue. You may have a script doctor come in and fix dialogue. I know, like Joss Whedon, that was one of the things he did early on, was he came in and rewrote dialogue so it was better, funnier, like more human, just more natural. Because in some cases, writers don't, you know, they write a dialogue that's functional in the story, but they don't write dialogue that sounds really natural. So like Joss Whedon worked on Waterworld, I think, actually. Fun fact. That was one of his earlier gigs. Was to fix all the dialogue in Waterworld, but he says afterwards like that they threw out all his dialogue suggestions, and it was like a week in hell of him trying to fix things. Let's see here. A really popular one that I'm sure they will make if they haven't made any sort of media off it is Name of the Wind. Now I've only read Name of the Wind. I didn't read the whatever the second one was. His name I don't remember. I think it was Kingkiller Chronicles. So the main character in that, whose name I can't even really pronounce, Quothe, he's a Rey Johnson. He's a character that really, he develops very, very quickly, and he develops so quickly and so proficiently that it's bizarre. And they'd have a little bit of a section at the beginning where he's kind of learning magic, and he does make some mistakes. So he's not like a super horrible one. But certainly by the midpoint in the book, everything exists for him to overcome. And one of the things that really stands out to me with that book is the fact that he attracts women in ways that are not the way women are actually attracted. And the first time he has sex with a woman, it's like the best that the woman's ever had. These are things that really will stand out to you, or really stood out to me when I read the book. Other than the fact that the book was mostly very boring to me, those things stood out as being really bad writing because they just are not believable on any kind of level. It reads like an author insert fantasy. Like if you have a virgin who's writing a romance scene, how do you think a virgin, is he capable of writing really a romance scene if he hasn't experienced it? Only if he's like watched pornography or something, and then he's going to write it like what he thinks sex is, or he's going to write a fantasy of what he imagines it will be like for him to do it, or what he imagines he ought to be able to. Like it's an insert fantasy. And so that's one of the things that I remember from that particular book. And so in some cases you can have moments that are kind of Rey Johnson moments, and definitely the midpoint and the later parts of that first book are filled with those moments, where the first time a character does something, he's like the best ever at it. Another example was Prince of Thorns, where the main character, I'm trying to remember his name, it starts with a J, but I always pronounce it like Yori or something. He's like a 13-year-old kid that everybody respects. He's like a master at combat. And then at the end, they explain it like he was under some magic spell that allowed him to do that stuff. But then he's able to, once he breaks the spell, he's exactly the same as he was. So it doesn't really make up for it. But every single time he does something, he does it in an amazingly hyper proficient way. And he's 13, including he has sex with a prostitute and she enjoys it. And he's really good at it, and he's not trying. It's like one of those moments where you're just like, dude, like, has the author ever slept with a woman? Has he ever talked to a woman? Like, it's one of those bizarre moments where you're wondering what kind of fantasy the author's living out by writing about a 13-year-old having sex with a prostitute and making the prostitute really enjoy it. Anyway, let's head back to some chat and take a look at some of that. Do you think in a way Rey wasn't intended to make sense from an in-universe perspective? She was always meant to be a meta character. I don't think she is a meta character, so I don't think that makes a lot of sense. Let's keep going. Do a review of Nicholas Sakara. We'll see. Glitchy Gear, your opinion on what makes a moral paragon or likewise a savant different from a Rey Johnson? Okay, so savant is so if you ever read Forrest Gump, the book, Forrest Gump is actually a savant. He's an idiot. He misses social cues. He doesn't understand what other people want or desire from him. But he's also like mysteriously really good at math, right? So autistic savants or Rain Man's probably a more familiar example for you guys since you probably haven't read Forrest Gump. But Rain Man is a really good example. You have a character who's an autistic savant. So a savant usually has significant penalties to their personality. So if you imagine you're rolling a Dungeons and Dragons character, a savant would be someone with like 25 wisdom, but like 9 in every other stat. Right, they're basically crippled except for one thing that they're very, very good at. Most people are not savants. We're generally good at most things and very good at maybe one thing. But a savant character would have some other significant flaw. So if you had a character who's, for instance, in Rain Man can count cards, you can't really manage him. He's emotionally unstable. He doesn't understand what people want. He can't express himself. He stares at the ground all the time. He gets extremely upset in situations where that are emotional or require him to interact with other people. So it's a great example of a savant. If you want a moral paragon would just be a saint, right? A saint, in most cases, is just someone that believes very fervently in what they believe and will follow it into martyrdom, right? So Gandalf, in lots of ways, is a moral paragon, as well as a paragon in terms of his power and his knowledge and things like that. He refuses the power of the ring. He refuses to save himself. He chooses to sacrifice himself for for like things which are higher up than him. That's usually an indicator that you have like a moral paragon. Somebody who doesn't believe in principles above themselves can't be a moral paragon. But a moral paragon doesn't have to be somebody that's all powerful. You can have a moral paragon in the case of Rorschach from The Watchmen, where he, at the end, because he is not compromising morally, he has to be destroyed. And of course, he's also sent his diary off, at least in the movies. I don't remember if this happens in the graphic novel, because I have a hard time separating the two now because it's been so long. But at least in the movies, he sends the diary off to expose the truth. He believes in the principle of the truth above even his own life. He never believes the end justifies the means, or that you can lie to accomplish good. So he's an example of a moral paragon. He's not a guy that, like, he's temperamental, he's violent. Really, some of the best parts in the movie are from that character. Like when he gets locked up in prison and he like breaks the glass and like throws the oil on the guy and he says, "Don't you get it? I'm not locked up in here with you. You're locked up in here with me." Jake Skywalker is when you take a great character and then you take away all the things that made them great, make them a complete loser, and make them act against their character. Let's see here. So nobody's talking to me for a while. Let's get down here. Crazy Chameleon, would you consider checking out Jay Dyer? He's a Christian philosopher, movie reviewer, and conspiracy theorist. I can. I have no guarantees. I have so little time. It's really hard for me to look at things that I haven't already decided are going to be part of my metrics. I know that sounds extremely businesslike and not very cool to say, but it's kind of true, right? So I can make time to go see Avengers Endgame because I know lots of people will see it and lots of people can talk to me about it. If I go and I check out something that's really obscure and it's nothing against this guy, he's probably great, that doesn't improve my metrics. So I just have to kind of do that on my own as a goodwill thing. So that's just my warning, is I can't make any promises about stuff that I don't think is that I think is kind of outside my business. That's just kind of how it is. And that's not anything against you or anyone else. T80 Combat Master, could setting play a role in good characters? For instance, could a character that is well suited for one setting come off as jarring in another? Absolutely. Characters are derived from their setting. Dimension 3500, I guess I missed the super chat here. Luke's final act of heroism, what crowns him as a Jedi, is an act of moral virtue. He was willing to martyr himself to not kill his father and to do the right thing. This is very Christian, so of course they subverted and ruined it. Absolutely. What a great comment. Yeah, that was his moral journey, and that was kind of what Yoda was trying to teach him the whole time, is that by trying to face Vader and become his equal, he was becoming like Vader. And when he chops off his father's hand and he sees that it's a robot hand like his own, that's the moment where he puts it all together and he understands the lessons that Yoda was trying to teach him from the beginning. Because that was the downfall of Anakin, was trying to acquire power for a good end. That was the creation of the Empire. But yes, back to setting. So if you have a character that works well in an urban setting, he's not going to work well in a country setting. This is actually a slight problem in the new Avengers movies, the last two, because there's so many different little mini universes from the MCU that are crammed together in this one movies. The settings, the difference between the settings, like Guardians of the Galaxy and Thor and Spider-Man, like they're so jarring and different. It's almost postmodern that they just kind of aren't together. It's like a brick wall into like a marble wall. It's a little bit jarring how different some of those are when we put them right next to each other, even though they kind of fit within a larger scope. When we see sometimes them really crossing over hard, it kind of feels like some of them don't fit. They're a little too different sometimes. Sir Tremendous says, I don't have a problem with stories that subvert tropes of the Star Wars universe. My favorite Star Wars story is Knights of the Old Republic 2, which is a complete deconstruction of the universe. KOTOR 2, I remember just being a really bad game when it came out, and I haven't played it since. Maybe I could replay it, but it was missing content. It was hated. It was hated when it came out. Problem with TLJ is they chose Luke Skywalker as a vehicle to deliver that subversion. We know who Luke is, and that's why TLJ's interpretation feels wrong. Yeah, if it had been somebody else, if it had been some other Jedi Master, and you could show some good against him, versus like the hero of the galaxy, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. George Warcrimes. I know this isn't the subject of the stream, but what do you think of the Sonic movie trailer? I will show you what I think of the Sonic movie trailer. Give me just a moment, okay? And I'm going to show you exactly what I think of the Sonic movie trailer. Here's what I think of the Sonic movie trailer. I think the Sonic movie trailer is one of these examples where aesthetics can be so bad they can make something almost unwatchable and sickening. I showed pictures of this Sonic. Now, my son is 3 years old, and he knows who Sonic the Hedgehog is because we played some Sonic games, and he's seen me play him. He said, he looks like a guy who's going to hurt me, is what he said. That's what he said about that Sonic. And I've never seen, it's like a reverse Uncanny Valley, like these human teeth with like the fur, but they didn't realize with a cartoon, these big spikes are supposed to represent the quills, not be big spikes of hair for no reason. So this is a Darth Vader comic that came out that was pretty laughable. So I had Darth Vader killing Sonic here. I made this on my phone, so it's not the best. It's not the best Photoshop job. I made it on like the Photoshop for your phone app. But it made me laugh. I'm just like, I can't believe how bad that Sonic looks. And then of course putting Jim Carrey in it. It's like, I haven't found Jim Carrey funny in like 20 years, so I'm not quite sure what I'm going to think about him now. Anyway, I don't like it. I'm not looking forward to that Sonic movie. And this is somebody who grew up with Sonic the Hedgehog. If you keep spamming me about Nicholas Sequeira, I'm gonna ban you or mute you. That's annoying. You're making it impossible for me to see the other chats. Stop bell ringing, guys. Have you seen Silence from Scorsese? I haven't, actually. Sorry. Let's see here. Luke was a real hero. He failed and got back up by the end. Yes, he was. So he had multiple failures, including getting his hand chopped off. Yeah, or Luke. So Geekdom says Luke wiped her memory. So that's Rey Johnson, right? So did Luke wipe her memory? Possibly. I called that the Kodor mind wipe, and that's another solution. And I think that would actually be a pretty good one. I think that'd actually be a pretty good solution to kind of explain why she knew, for example, the Jedi mind trick. Luke taught it to her, but they wiped her memory to try to protect her. Let's see here. Why don't SJWs or leftists praise Lucas for emasculating Darth Vader in the prequel trilogy? I don't know. I think they hate the prequel trilogy because they didn't understand it. I don't know why. I like the prequel trilogy, especially. I like it better now than when it first came out, and that's just because there's more to it. Neil says, my issue with Rey is her backstory makes no sense. With her kind-hearted, noble personality in a terrible world. Yeah. Vin from Mistborn is a better example of Rey and not Mary Sue. So Vin from Mistborn is a very good example. And it'd be hard to portray her properly on film. But she grows up as a ska on the streets. She doesn't trust anyone, and so she learns to trust and learns to be more human. That's part of her journey, especially in the first book. And her power, she discovers her power little by little. So by the end of the book, she's a very powerful character, but not all powerful. And essentially, she overcomes the final boss, if you will. She overcomes the final villain through craftiness and understanding rather than raw power, which is not the case with a Rey Johnson. You know, she has a great growth. Ash, making him a kid, they're talking about Anakin, making an awkward teen that's not charismatic with women at all, giving him a female name, Annie, or burning away literally his manhood, possibly. Ooh, yeah, I didn't think of that. Is it possible because Lucas didn't call attention to it, or wasn't over-the-top virtue signaler? I think those movies came out before the great the great tidal wave of virtue signaling SJW-ness. At this time, the SJWs were still in the Delta Quadrant, meaning they were still just on the universities. And at that time, I was in a university and I taught at a university. So I knew about it. Like, SJWs are nothing new to me, but the general public wasn't talking about this stuff, except in a comical manner. Like, you might have a character on a sitcom who was a raging feminist and she was just a joke as a result. The idea that you couldn't make fun of feminism is a rather new thing. So it was definitely in the Delta Quadrant, which is universities. The Borg hadn't spread out into popular culture yet. Road trip with Han and Luke would have been awesome. That's what the original plot was for episode 7. El Bersadente says, nothing about Rey makes any sense. Not even her accent. Growing up on Jakku and she speaks with an accent nobody there uses? Really? Abrams sucks just as much as Rian. It's true. On Tatooine, they all speak with an American accent. Which is what everyone sounds like there. Right? And Alec Guinness is not from there, so he doesn't talk like them. I actually didn't really care that much about the accents. I just thought it was like she has really nice skin for like a girl who's starving in the desert. You know, it's okay. You want to make them attractive. Like, a lot of that stuff didn't really bother me about episode 7. It's like, oh, she's super attractive in the desert. It's like you want your actresses to look attractive. I would not have made, if I had set my main character as like an orphan on Jakku, I still would have made her really as pretty as possible, because people like looking at pretty things, especially women. Like rugged male characters, women like. Rugged female characters, nobody likes. That's the reality of it. Let's see here. Do you think John Wick is a Mary Sue? I love the series, but he tends to get unrealistic compared to Robert McCall in The Equalizer. It was a more well-done character, in my opinion. I haven't ever watched a John Wick, so maybe I'll watch it. That may surprise you. I don't watch that many movies. Like, I haven't watched a lot of movies since my kids were born, and before that, I only really watched movies on video because I was really cheap. Kobe Chan. So Star Wars merchandise isn't selling. How are they going to spice the new movies up so that merch moves faster? Well, the thing about moving merchandise is you have to have a movie that kids want the characters from. So the designs have to look really good. That's number 1. Number 2, the movie has to be really good and kids have to like it. Number 3, collectors have to like it. So a lot of sales of this stuff is geared towards collectors. They have the Black Series figures and all this kind of crap. They started coming out with toys that are meant for kids. They just come in little plastic tubes. And they're great. I could buy them for $3 for my son, and he could play with Luke Skywalker and Chewbacca. Now, I don't, because I have my Return of the Jedi toys, and he just plays with those. But, let's say that I wanted to buy them. I would just buy the $3 little cheap ones. Like, why would I buy a $20 hyper-detailed Black Series blah, 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 blah for my kid? I wouldn't, right? Because he's just going to tear it up in most cases. So I'm going to buy the cheaper one. Those Black Series ones are really for adults to collect and put on shelves, or maybe older kids to play with, right? But even then, if you told an older kid, it's like, I could get you a package that has all 8, they'd be like, give me all 8. And like, oh, but they're not Black Series. Who cares? So you have to get collectors back on board. Are collectors going to get back on board at this point? I don't know, but I think once you piss off the collectors, they don't usually come back. They don't start collecting again. I know guys who had $100,000 Star Wars collections that are selling them. They're selling their collections. They're getting rid of their toys and their memorabilia because they feel completely disconnected from Star Wars and they don't care about it anymore. They're like, now's the time to get rid of it while there's still people who want to buy it before Disney drives the franchise into the ground and nobody cares about Star Wars memorabilia anymore. We'll get rid of it. $100,000 collection, what you have to think is that's $100,000 of value that person has bought out of Star Wars. Isolating that one fan is the equivalent of losing, 1,000 regular fans, right? So if you isolate one mega fan that likes to collect and buy toys, you're losing 1,000 regular people. So if you are going to trade the collectors and the hardcore fans for regular people, it needs to be at like a 100-to-1 ratio at least to make up for the loss that you're going to lose in merchandise and things like that. All the values in that tail, it's not in the spike. People forget that. Like, you need to have a great movie to get people interested, but you kind of have to have a lot of people who love that universe and are wanting to buy things from it. Otherwise, you're not going to be making money on merchandise. In other words, most of the merchandise is bought by a small percentage of the people, and once you lose them, they don't ever come back. So there's probably no way to recover. Do you think John Wick is a Mary Sue? I'll skip that because I haven't actually seen. I've only seen like some portions of John Wick. I can go back and try to watch John Wick. I know people really like it. Film Girl, welcome back. I haven't seen the recent Star Wars films, even though I work in cinema. The screens are too busy. Do you think they're worth watching? So they are worth watching. Now, the chat's going to explode and be angry at me. They're worth watching for you because you're a student of film and you're a student of writing. So they're worth watching because they have lots of things in them that you can easily see what's wrong and what's right. Sometimes if a movie's very good, it's hard to figure out what's wrong and what's right. It's those movies that are bad or are middling where you can really see and separate out the different pieces of the movie and see what works and what doesn't work. Just as an example, think about how many things have to go right for a movie to be good. You have to have a good story, a good dialogue. It has to be edited properly. It has to be photographed correctly. The cinematography has to be good. The effects have to be good if you're going to have special effects. The acting has to be really on point. You have to have a good score. There's probably 100 other things. You have to have a grip who's good. You have to know mic placements. You have to know audio engineering, right? So all of these things have to be good before you get to a movie that people see and they're like, that's good. If any one of those things is off, it can significantly harm the final movie. And it can significantly harm how people react to the final movie. I remember watching a documentary that actually won the Academy Award for Best Documentary. It was on steroid use in the Olympics and in cycling. I don't remember the name of it right now. I'm sorry, I did a review on it. I said it was accidentally good. It was actually a very poorly made documentary, but the subject was so good it overcame all the technical flaws of the movie. The movie was technically terribly constructed. It was edited really poorly. The music was terrible. And just those two things by themselves, bad editing, terrible music, would be enough to sink any documentary. But the main guy that they focused on, this Russian who was testing athletes and had participated in like an Olympic cheating scam, was so interesting that it saved the movie. So any other subject, that would have been a terrible documentary, would have been a total failure. It was accidentally good because it technically was poor, but the subject was interesting. So only when you have that sort of thing are you able to see like, oh man, this score really sucks. Mostly you would just turn it off before you finished watching it. So the new Star Wars movies are totally worth watching, even if they suck, because you can see exactly what you shouldn't do. You learn via negativa. It's great. Oh, Brazilian currency. Thank you, Ian. I didn't... the R dollar. The Reais. I don't know how to pronounce that. I'm sorry. I don't speak Portuguese. Terrapar, hello good sir. I'm a bit late to the party, but I can't personally stand Vanellope from Wreck-It Ralph. The arrogant, accept me character arc is tedious. I like her in the first one. I think she's absolutely awful in the second one. She becomes a really vain, annoying character. In the first one, her main feeling you have towards her is pathos. She's pathetic. But pathetic works in children's characters, like, please sir, may I have some more? So pathos works in child characters, I think, and so I think it works with her. That I can understand how other people might not like it. Aren't fan theories always wrong, though? Except when they're right. Yeah. So this is a secretly super smart comment from Southpaw. Aren't fan theories always wrong? No. They're right, like, infrequently. But what happens is we live in a time period where, imagine there's 100 fan theories from 10 years ago. One of them ends up being right. People are like, oh my God, this guy predicted it 10 years ago. It's probably on accident. They aren't always wrong. Geekdom says there are legit spoilers from Making Star Wars that explain all of this, and it's very interesting. It does have to do with possession. Interesting. What do you think of the movies of Alfred Hitchcock? I think they're great. I like Alfred Hitchcock. He really knew how to work with tension, right? So his movies are all about how you draw out tension and you get people to really focus in on a scene and try to anticipate what's going to happen and then surprise them a little bit. It's great. Let's see here. Why do people keep believing a really good sequel could somehow fix the horrible writing of the previous chapters? Because what they want is they want a complete package that everything makes sense in context. I am not a big believer of this. However, I'm going to go against myself a little bit here because I watched Endgame. I watched Avengers Endgame. And Avengers Endgame contextualized some of the decisions that the directors made in Captain America 3 and some of the decisions that were made just in some other movies, but especially Captain America 3. I would say Avengers Endgame made Captain America 3 a better movie because it brought forward the conclusion of the conflict they introduced and why they introduced it in Captain America 3 and also Iron Man 3. So it's not usually, but sometimes contextualization can make you more affectionate towards something previous that was probably more flawed. Star Wars Tour did that nicely with the Inquisitor story. Your master wants to transfer their spirit into your body, and she fails. The results are hilarious. Making Star Wars website has legit spoilers. Hi, Reclusi Arc. Sorry, I have some allergies today. If the Palpatine possessing Vader's helmet theory, J.K. Rowling should sue for royalties. Wait, no, she'll make Vader and the Emperor lovers or something. Yeah, you're never gay at birth. You're not gay at puberty. You're gay when J.K. Rowling decides you are gay. Leaf Thracia, great, dude, great name. I'm a big Fire Emblem fan. I'm an aspiring author. Do you think that you could help me out with my fantasy story? I can't read unpublished manuscripts, so that's something I can't do. It's a legal thing. Basically, there's a bunch of reasons, but I can't read unpublished manuscripts. Yeah, I've seen you on Twitter, so I probably can't really help you out. I don't really have the time. And I don't think you want to pay me for author services. I'm not a big believer in author services. I think you'd learn more by completing your project and doing more projects probably than you'd learn by paying someone to do things for you. So probably not. But I think you should continue trying to work on it. Right? You should try to finish a book. That's what you want to do. You'll learn more by finishing the book than you'll learn by buying author services before that. Matchstick, could you make a Writestream on space opera or high fantasy? Absolutely. That's a good idea. Let's see what else I missed here. How is playing Final Fantasy VII? It's good. I haven't played it in a couple days because my wife has wanted to stay up with my daughter. So, but it's a good game. You know, it actually really holds up. Even the aesthetics hold up, although the newer version of it is just not as... it doesn't look quite as good as it did on those old CRTs. That's just kind of the way it is. I'm sorry, I missed a whole bunch. Let me see. What did I miss? Oh, missed the super chat. $5. Thank you from Mana Martine. What is your favorite character archetype? Mine is the tragic hero, Rorschach, Batman, Sturm, Brightblade, Dragonlance series are great examples to me. Yeah, Sturm is a cool one. Although I'm not big into I think nowadays I don't really like the Dragonlance stuff. It's just a little too fast and cheesy. But my favorite character archetype, I don't know. That's hard to say. I tend to like. I don't want to call them tragic heroes, but I tend to like Odyssean type heroes. So heroes that struggle against the gods or overwhelming odds. Even though it's impossible for them to have victory, they do it nonetheless. So that would be anti-heroes like Elric, of course, Odysseus, Guts from Berserk. Characters like that are very inspiring to me. The character that doesn't, essentially has no hope of victory, but goes nonetheless. So like the lines that tend to have an effect on me from Lord of the Rings is like, that won't be enough to break the lines of Mordor, but we will meet them in battle nonetheless. It's like, yes, that's like such a heroic thing to say. It's like we'll go to the fight even though I don't think there's a chance of winning, because it's what we must do. It's what we must do to be men. Can you guess Rey Johnson's religious beliefs by looking at the films he makes? He seems like he's an atheist or agnostic. I put him as an agnostic. Atheists tend to be a little more logical. Agnostics are like, I haven't decided on atheism, but I'm just non-religious. Crazy Comedian says, thanks for answering my question. You're welcome. I've heard the series Gentlemen Bastards writes really bad dudes really well. Have you heard of it? Nope. I haven't seen it. Have you watched the last episode of Game of Thrones? Quick thoughts. I don't watch Game of Thrones. I've only watched the first few episodes. Read the first book. Wasn't interested in reading more of that. It's not my kind of fantasy. If it's yours, that's fine. It just doesn't really interest me. I'd rather than watching an episode of Game of Thrones, which I mostly find boring and not titillating at all. Although I can wax poetic on why people find it titillating. It's like, because I could make a joke. Hey, you could read a good book for 50 minutes and watch 10 minutes of pornography, and that would probably be a better use of your time than a Game of Thrones. But people like Game of Thrones for more than just the boobs. But people get really big on seeing the nudity in Game of Thrones because that's not a person they're used to seeing nude, right? It's kind of like seeing a friend naked. Like, it's a little bit forbidden. It's a little bit weird. And so you want it. That's the titillation of nudity in like a show like Game of Thrones. It's like if you've seen a character clothed, to finally see that character naked is like an exciting experience. It'd be like seeing some girl you went to high school with naked and, having sex with her, right? It's a different experience than watching a nobody in like pornography. I can't go any further back up the chat. So this has been the most active chat in a long time. Let me very quickly try to go through all the oranges here. Would Superman count as a Rey Johnson because he's just good at everything, or because he's a superhero he gets a pass? Superman is interesting. I think the explanation of Superman from Kill Bill is probably the best one. Superman's an alien, and he's better than us. He's a god, right? And he has explanations for why that exists. But if Superman were living a normal, like the way he lives a normal life is a reflection of what he thinks of people. He thinks they're like pathetic. That's why Clark Kent is weak and passive. Clark Kent is a beta male. He's not an alpha. And that's how Superman views humanity. Superman's failure state is not his own death. In most cases, it's the death of others. And so that frames all the good stories of Superman. And if you understand that about Superman classically, then it's a more interesting character. And he has more interesting things to say. He is a god. And so if you look at him as a god rather than as a man, you realize that the stories revolve around goddom, not humanity. The term probably doesn't really apply. He's not really a Rey Johnson. Is there anything to consider when picking a pen name? Very interesting question. I can't fully answer it because if I used a pen name, I wouldn't tell you. Because I would only write things with pen names that I didn't want associated with my regular brand. That's not entirely true. Okay, I'll try to address this quickly. So when you pick a pen name, you want to pick a pen name that fits in the genre that you're writing in. And you may pick a pen name that obscures your gender or changes your gender. So if you're writing romance, you should pick a female pen name. You just should. Women are more likely to read books by other women. That's like the general market consensus in the romance genre. That's not true of other genres. In other genres, nobody really cares whether a male or a female wrote it. It doesn't factor in. Notice that Joan Rowling uses J.K. Rowling. It obscures her gender. So when someone sees J.K. Rowling, they don't immediately think of a female writer. And so that was a decision that was made early on. essentially have a gender neutral pen name. So that's something that you can think of. I know several guys who write in genres that are dominated by female readers and female writers, and so they use gender neutral pen names. So if I were going to write like a young adult vampire romance, I wouldn't have it David V. Stewart. I might do DV Stewart or D Stewart or DVD Stewart or something, so that it's not clear that it's a male who's written it. So usually your pen name, you want to either fit in the genre, or like main thing is you want to obscure your gender if it's relevant for that genre. Now, some people, I'm hoping people don't get upset when I'm saying like you want to pretend to be a woman, but that's just how the market is. It's not like me being sexist, and it's not that all the readers of romance are sexist. It's just a thing in it. Okay. So follow the market. That's what you want to do. If you're writing in fantasy, a lot of people tend to choose like kind of British pen names. They want to sound like Michael Moorcock, right? It's kind of a British name, or, so they do initials and names that sound like they're from the English Isles, especially if you have a complicated, if your name's like Schwarzenegger or something like kind of odd, some people might want to use a pen name if you're writing primarily for an English speaking audience, because the name gets a little weird. But at the same time, Arnold Schwarzenegger proves you don't really need to change your name to have success. So it's up to you. It depends what you want your brand to be. If I could do it all over again, I might be completely anonymous, even though maybe you guys like looking at my face. And I'm not anonymous at all on the internet. But if I could do it all over again, I might be completely anonymous, because it would reduce the potential long tail effects of not being anonymous, meaning people harassing me, people calling old employers thinking I still work there, things like that. Not really anything to do with the book market, but just to do with the fact that there's people on the internet who hate me. Sorry, let me quickly get through more stuff. Is there a Rey Johnson in Game of Thrones TV show? Don't watch Game of Thrones. Michael Burnham has ruined Star Trek. Yes. I don't know. I haven't watched any of the new Star Trek stuff. And that's huge, because I'm a huge Star Trek fan. I'm actually a bigger Star Trek fan than I am a Star Wars fan, at least historically. But after the movies, after what JJ did with the movies, and they're not, Into Darkness is bad. The first one's not that bad. I kind of enjoyed it, actually. But like after that, I just didn't really have any faith that they were going to make a good series. Then they put it behind a paywall. I'm not going to pay $11 a month to watch a Star Trek series that I'm ambivalent on. Do you think Rey Johnsons would have an innate tendency toward villainy in the real world, having virtually no opposition to their goals? Ooh, watch Death Note, right? If you give a regular person that kind of power, I think that they would have a tendency towards evil because of the temptation of the power itself. Evil is inside all of us. So if you have a real person who's evil, I think what makes a Rey Johnson a Rey Johnson is that they're super powerful, and yet that power has no effect on them. They're completely morally good. So that's part of it. So Rey Johnsons wouldn't, but if you gave somebody super power, they might become very villainous. So think of Death Note. Death Note's a great, the series, of course, not the movie. The series, not that live action crap. The series is great. And I've been actually watching it, finishing it up, because I never finished it. That's another thing I get to do, because my daughter has to sleep like this. So I get to watch old animes. From Kaku, $5. Thank you. Thoughts on Saitama is a good example for God deity versus man, the inversion of man versus God deity. Do stories always demand a power counterbalance? So One Punch Man. One Punch Man. So this is a good one. An inversion of man and the deity. Do stories always demand a power counterbalance? One Punch Man's conflict is not about power. As the series goes on, he encounters greater power. It's really, it's an existential crisis. And the existential crisis is when you are all powerful and you can defeat any enemy, there's no more challenge in life. So One Punch Man's ultimate crisis is that his power cannot be used for good. He has no challenge. His power has rendered his life meaningless because there's nothing that really challenges him. So as the series goes on, his quest is to find greater and greater challenges, essentially to find the limits of his godhood. So it's him that demands the power balance. Maybe the story demands it, but One Punch Man himself needs that power counterbalance for him to be sane. That's why I find it such an interesting show, and really very, very funny. I really find it a very funny show. So I do recommend One Punch Man. The comedy in it is, to me, it definitely transcends the culture that created it. And if you're familiar with either, lots of different kinds of animes, or you're familiar with superheroes, then it's a great little series. $5 from Anna Martine. Thank you. Are you familiar with the Jim Butcher's Dresden Files? Yes. So I've read the first few. I'm not a big fan of them not because I think they're badly written or anything like that. The setting just doesn't really appeal to me. They're one of the favorite series of a good friend of mine, and I borrowed a couple from him and read him, and he writes in that genre, the urban fantasy genre, and I can see why it's appealing to lots of people. The setting is just not that appealing to me, and the characters themselves, they just don't grip me very much. It is a good example of kind of pulp revival, though. It's a great pulp story. It has great noir elements, so it's like a detective story, but there's wizards and werewolves and vampires and stuff like that. So I think it works pretty well for what it is. My brother-in-law, that's who I'm really talking about. He writes in the urban fantasy genre, and he has a book out called Immortal Fear. That's pretty fun to read. It has a lot of Norse mythology elements in it instead of like wizard stuff, so it's good. So yeah, I haven't read all the series. I read the first like 3 books, and they're okay. I didn't feel any need to read any more than that because it just doesn't interest me that much. But I can see why lots of people like them. It's a great crossover of noir and low fantasy. Let's see here. Go quickly. Jim can't carry the movie. Oh, I'm talking about Sonic. It's like a nightmare. That Sonic's design looks like a nightmare. It's the worst aesthetics ever. Rey would be a perfect sister for Roundhead. Why couldn't the Sonic movie take the Spider-Verse approach, making a CGI 2D hybrid film? They should have just made an animated movie. It's not going to be any more expensive to make a CGI movie. You'd peg the market. Like, who are you marketing this to? Kids, right? Kids are going to want to see some furry animal running around fast. Should have just picked the classic Sonic design and just made a CGI movie and made it a fantasy movie. Why would you put a horrible looking furry... It looks like a dude in a furry suit. Why would you put him in a live action movie and then have Jim Carrey as a skinny Eggman or a skinny Robotnik? I don't understand it. It would cost less to do the CGI movie, I would guess, rather than hiring Jim Carrey for like $10 million. $10 million can buy you a lot of work. Isn't Alita a Rey Johnson? Why is she a lot more likable? She's more likable because she isn't a Rey Johnson. So one of the things about Alita is that she has an innocence and a naivete. That's why people like her. That's the first thing that people are attracted to with her. She essentially begins life as a bit of a mystery box, and you fill in what's there. And so the revelation of her powers don't come out of nowhere, right? They're like slowly come one piece at a time until she ends up being fully powered up by the end of the movie. So she doesn't start out all powerful. It's like someone's like, oh man, she's such a Mary Sue. It's like, yeah, like that part where she gets literally ripped to shreds by the giant robot and completely destroyed and almost dies. One of the reasons that I think that scene is appealing, where she gets completely cut apart and cut to bits, is because she refuses to back down. She refuses to run away. So that's an appealing, heroic action, right? Like the facing death and choosing to die rather than to relent in your attack, in your focus. And that's something that's kind of, I think that the Japanese have a little bit better flavor with that sometimes. So it's cool to see that. So I think she's a lot more likable for a lot of reasons. The main one is that she isn't a Rey Johnson. And so it's full of scenes like, Luke gets his hand chopped off. He's not a Mary Sue, right? Alita gets literally chopped to bits and suffers very big consequences for her arrogance and her naivete. So she's not a Rey Johnson. Pete says the prequels do have issues with bad delivery of dialogue at times. Stale dialogue and pacing is clunky at times, but the prequels are much more entertaining than some give it credit. I think they're just better stories than people give them credit. And this is one of those examples, like even, one scene where like the dialogue is a little off can poison people for the whole film. People remember the bee sting instead of the rest of the good stuff. Prequels are very rich with the story, yes. I think Palpatine and Obi-Wan are the most intriguing characters. Yes, I think Anakin was most interesting in 3. I agree. I can honestly say that we had Star Wars: The Last Journey merch for months after the film was released. No one wanted to buy it. Yeah, it's like in dollar stores, and over here in the U.S. Target used to have a whole aisle, like 2 sides of Star Wars stuff after Force Awakens, and even really before it. Now it's like a 2-foot section, and everything's on clearance. They want to get rid of it. I think Hasbro is counting the license as a loss. They're losing money on Star Wars. Didn't you see the guy react to the trailer who had a sore on his cheek and was crying the whole time? I think he'll keep collecting. Maybe, but that's just one guy. Do you think Rey could even have been salvaged after Force Awakens? Yeah, if they did the Jedi mind wipe and really knocked her down, like Luke could have really knocked her down a bunch of pegs and she would have realized, kind of the way Luke was knocked down a bunch of pegs by Yoda, and she would have realized that she had a lot of learning to do. Icarus. I don't think John Wick is a Mary Sue. From the beginning, it establishes that John Wick is the best of the best in terms of being an assassin. He's a competent man, he's also middle-aged. It's like, it'd be like saying that all the characters in Ronin are Rey Johnsons because they're really good spies. It's like, yeah, they work for the CIA. They're the best of the best, and they still make mistakes. They make mistakes of judgment. So you can have a very powerful character make mistakes of judgment. That's a way that you can avoid making a Rey Johnson. Terrapar says, thank you for the response. Thank you for the comment. In Portuguese, the R is pronounced as an H, unless it comes after a vowel. Oh. So a real is pronounced a real, and the plural, reais. Oh, interesting. See, I didn't know that. I don't speak Portuguese. John Wick gets too injured all the time to be a Mary Sue, kind of like John McCain in Die Hard. He wins, but he gets beat up all the time. You got to beat him up so you feel like they have some limits. My favorite Die Hard movie, by the way, is Die Hard with a Vengeance with Samuel L. Jackson. He's such a good running, he's such a good counterman to the John McClane character. It's great. Documentary with poor editing music. Ever see the Kubrick and The Shining fake moon landing fan analysis? Editing and pacing is a nightmare. I haven't seen it. They were just trying to stretch for 90 minutes. Let's see here. Film Girl, thank you. Thank you for being here, too. Yeah, my family's doing great. What do you think of Stanley Kubrick? Ash asks. I'm a big fan of Stanley Kubrick films. Kind of like Alfred Hitchcock films. One of the things about Stanley Kubrick is that he understood how to pace a movie and pace scenes so that they really have a good emotional impact. So like The Shining is a really good example. I know Stephen King wasn't a big fan of Kubrick's version of The Shining, but I think it's actually better than Stephen King's book, believe it or not. And that's because he really hypes up those moments. The moments are really terrifying. Jack Nicholson is great. Everything's great in it. And it's really like a very high tremolo note of tension the whole last 20 minutes of the movie. It's great. Do you think this wave of wokeness in film and entertainment media will go away or at least fade? Hard to say. I think yes, because things always occur in cycles. The fading will be interesting though, because the way it's going to fade is just the institutions that are converged will have to subside to other institutions which are not yet converged. So by converged, I mean full of SJWs who run all of the programming, right? So Google is fully converged. Apple is fully converged. Disney is fully converged at this point. So it may take a while because the way that the government interacts with those large corporations. Essentially, the government favors large corporations structurally, and through things like IP law, patent law, things like that. Those always favor the current establishment. But eventually, people fracture out enough that one area becomes enough of a free space that it can grow, and then eventually you have a displacement. Everything grows and decays. So, once things become converged, they'll begin to decay because you're no longer emphasizing the quality of the product. You're emphasizing the message. And at that point, anyone who emphasizes the product over the message is going to have a competitive advantage over you. What did I miss? F Your Mercy, best line in 2019. I loved Alita. Thank you, Madame Martine. Kaku says Deadpool could be the counter to Malthusian Thanos. Yeah, I don't think we'll see. Deadpool really in the MCU ever, unfortunately. Do you think Lucas wanted to suggest that Anakin has a vague and some sort of Oedipus complex? He constantly mentions his mother and Padme in his dreams. I don't think so. I don't see that. I think that's just his attachment to his mom. Namor, probably the first anti-hero in comics. I don't think I can answer that, George. Sorry. What else did I miss? There's so many chats. This is a super active chat today. I'm not sure how many people are actually watching. I'm a couple hundred. So I appreciate your patience with the chats. Film Girl says I might miss your stream on the 15th as I'll be out for my birthday. Happy birthday. That's good. There I was. The chat also jumps down, so it's easy for me to lose my place. I would like to pay you for author services. Namely, I want you to write more books or stories that I can buy and read in under 2 hours instead of going to the movies. Well, you'll like the next one. The next one's sci-fi horror space opera thing that I'm working on now. It's very scary to me. It's kind of like Scary Dreams. So maybe you'll like it. I don't know what I'm going to call it, but the main character's insane, and his sidekick has a significant brain injury. So hopefully that's an interesting setup for you. Any thoughts on why Elric of Melniboné is so unknown in the US these days? I don't know. I think it probably has more to do with the publishing industry than anything. Publishers don't always emphasize these classic books. I'd say the Earthsea series is not that known, and it really ought to be. There's lots of series that need to be known. I'd say after about 10 or 20 years, publishers are always looking for a new book to capture people's attention, and they won't. Elric books are always out of print, coming into print with limited runs. Of course, you can get the ebooks. The ebooks are usually a little bit pricey, but they're kind of worth it. You can get the used Elric books for pretty cheap. I recommend anything by Michael Moorcock. I'm a big fan of him. Every series is different. Some people might like Hawkmoon. Hawkmoon is super imaginative. I really like that series. Some people like the Arakose stuff. There's a lot there, and he's still writing new books, and they're always a different take than what you expect. And that might be part of it. He's always been kind of defiant of the genre from the very beginning. He works within the pulp genre, but then kind of works outside of it at the same time. And he's always just slightly an enigma in the publishing industry. Let's keep going. Have you read the Harry Flashman or Commissar Caiaphas Kane books? I have not, actually. The character archetype is a total coward and scoundrel who lucks into success. I meant to talk about more different character types. I ended up talking about Rey Johnson the whole time. Another one is the completely pathetic character that no one likes. So if you ever read the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant series, which is a fantasy series, which features the most unlikable main character maybe in the history of literature, The character, I think in the first book, he like rapes somebody because he thinks he's having a dream and it's not a dream. He's actually in this fantasy world, which really sets you off. You really don't like the character. And the character continues. Sorry. The character continues to be pathetic and wicked all the way through the series. You never really like him. So I'm like, why do I read these books? Like, there's a lot of other stuff in those books that is good. But if you make a character that's so pathetic and unlikable and nobody likes him, chances are they're going to close the book. I don't know what to call that character. A Thomas Covenant. Struggles against the gods with no chance of winning sounds a lot like the Norse conception of heroes. Makes me think of Wagner. Yeah, it's a Greek one too. Like in the Greek tradition or just the pagan European tradition, it's better to be a man than to be a god. Gods are often portrayed as somewhat childish. And so Odysseus is struggling against the gods themselves, and it gives his life purpose and meaning. And in a sense, he's greater than the gods because his challenge is greater. What challenge does Zeus have, or Jupiter? What challenge does that god have? The Norse gods comparatively have a lot more challenges. They're in danger often. Idun gets her golden apple stolen. Everyone becomes old. In the Norse myths, the gods die in Ragnarok. Like, they have a limited lifespan. They die like men. So I find the Norse pantheon very interesting in that sense. What do you think about the flat character arc? Characters that don't change and have no development, but every character they interact with in the world changes because of them. I don't know. I don't know how to react to that. Usually those are static characters, like background characters, not main characters. Lobster 11 says everyone likes anime titties. Your thoughts on Blade Runner 2049? Haven't watched it. I don't necessarily have plans to watch it. I didn't ask for that movie, and I'm not really interested in it. But everyone's like, you got to watch it. So maybe I'll find 7 hours to watch it, or however long it is. But I don't have high expectations. Do you think so many series and films are now falling into ridiculousness because so many people are versed in theology, so when they try to make profound points, they fail? That might be it. I think people don't know enough of philosophy and just maybe haven't studied history. They study other fiction. So rather than having fiction reflect philosophy, theology, history, in addition to being kind of within other genres, it only reflects the other fiction that the author has taken, or it reflects their real life. So if it reflects their real life, some cases it can feel a little too much pathos, little too familiar. And if it doesn't have any kind of philosophical base, nobody really stands for anything concrete. So they do ridiculous things. That might be part of it. Our education system doesn't emphasize education anymore, which is weird because it doesn't teach skills and it doesn't teach general education. I don't know what people get taught in colleges anymore. All I know is that I know very few college graduates who I would consider educated. I know people with doctorates that I consider like idiots. They don't even know like their own field is bunk. I don't know how to explain it any other way. I've met so many people that have spent 7 years in college and don't understand anything. They don't even know, they've never read Plato. Do you think writing a philosophical or political book is better to spread a set of ideas when it's nonfiction or a fiction story? That's a great question. I'd say fiction. If you want to spread the ideas, fiction. I know that sounds weird. Like if you want to convey them accurately, nonfiction. But if you want to spread them, fiction. Ayn Rand knew this. This is why she wrote Atlas Shrugged. She wanted to spread her ideas. Now, Atlas Shrugged tries to explain as it demonstrates. I think 1984 is a better example because it just shows rather than spending all of its time trying to explain the ideas. But it explains the ideas pretty well as well. So the ideas are more popular, the idea of like doublethink and newspeak. These are ideas from 1984, and they spread because 1984 profoundly expressed these good ideas, but also is a great story. 1984 is more popular because it's a better story. It's just better than Atlas Shrugged in almost every way. Atlas Shrugged, it's trying to it's trying too hard to promote its philosophy. So its good qualities are often overlooked by people, including the author, perhaps herself. So it'd be better it's better to spread it through fiction if you want it to spread. But nonfiction if you want to explain it clearly. Critical Eats Japan. I find the nudity in Game of Thrones to just be pointless and unnecessary. I do too, but I understand the way titillation works. What do you think of Lucas calling his religious beliefs Buddhist Methodist? It means he's influenced by the West and the East. Both Christian and the idea of, the core of Buddhism doesn't view itself as like incompatible with other religions necessarily. So like the idea of Buddhism would be more about achieving balance. And I think that makes sense in the context of his movies. Do you see Star Wars ever recovering from the malaise that it's presently languishing in? Personally, I'm not optimistic and would bet on that horse. Nope. I don't believe it will ever actually recover. Not the way it was. There are many reasons for this. Somebody's at my door. I'll be right back, guys, because somebody has interrupted me. So I'll be right back. Okay. We're back. What's up, guys? No, I didn't get swatted. It was Cub Scouts trying to sell me something. I don't see Star Wars recovering because a corporate entity cannot manage an IP the way an artist does. It won't. It will always view it as an asset to be exploited. So once Star Wars dies, they'll wait a couple years for people to forget about how bad their last few entries were. The original trilogy will get remade. The question is whether it will get remade in 5, 10, or 15 years. And then they will try to do more stuff and build on top of that. If they give Ryan Johnson a trilogy, you know that it's over for sure. It's not gonna ever recover. So it'll never be what it was. It will never ever be what it was, but it will get rebooted a million times. It's gonna be way worse than it is now. It's gonna get worse before. In fact, it'll never get better, but it will get worse. Rancid Ramble says, I think you're way off. The porn is less and less as Game of Thrones goes on. It's just got great production value, and it used to be full of amazing twists. 6 main characters dying, for example. See, when I read the first book, it just felt kind of meandering to me for that reason. Like, things were done to surprise you, and that's great. Like, I don't want to take anything away from the surprise twists, but it just kind of, those things came out of nowhere because they weren't really set up very well, in my opinion. Are you sure Superman thinks humans are pathetic? Well, Superman doesn't exist, so he can think whatever I think he can think whatever I want him to think. Professor Geek would disagree. He has some good stuff on aspirational heroes. Superman, Captain Marvel, Billy Batson. Okay. Whatevs. Let's see. Keep going. What did I miss? You watch anime. Have you seen Hunter x Hunter? I have not seen Hunter x Hunter. I don't. Watching anime was like a 90s subculture thing. I don't watch a lot of TV at all, whether it's anime or anything else. I don't watch TV. Speaking of anime and the humor of One Punch Man transcending the culture, what do you think of Ranma Half? I thought it was funny. Tenchi and Rune Soldier. I don't either remember or I've never seen Tenchi and Rune Soldier. Ranma Half I thought was funny. I think a lot of that Japanese stuff is funny. But I could see how a lot of people just kind of wouldn't get the humor. Any thoughts on Rick Riordan? I've never read it, so I have no thoughts on it. It just seems like more like kind of young adult trash. I don't know. Have you thought about doing a live stream discussion with Mauler? I don't know who that is. I think he did like a Star Wars video. I think I've seen it suggested. I don't know who that is. I hold you both in high regard, and it would be interesting to see you two discuss films and writings in general. So I asked on Twitter, like, who should I have anyone guest on today? And people responded with a bunch of people I don't know. I have to go find these people and like make connections with them. Given your knowledge of anime, are you familiar with Naoki Urasawa's Monster? I don't think I am. Sorry. Let's keep going. So Rey William Johnson aside, are there any characters who are good in the new Star Wars? Poe Dameron's almost good. He's acted very melodramatically, but he actually kind of like is almost a bad boy at times. He's almost like the inferior officer that refuses to follow orders and thinks he's bad. He almost is good. He's almost good in like Last Jedi. Zimamaru. There we go. I just finished writing my first book, a little over 100,000 words, and I've done revisions twice now. What do I do now? Get it published? Any videos you have to explain the process? Okay. I'll do videos to explain the process. So you can either self-publish or try to traditionally publish. To traditionally publish, you have to query agents, not publishers. Do not go with a vanity publisher. So I'll just say that. And I'll do some more content on exactly how to do that. I have a lot of content on my channel that addresses that, and so do other authors. There's a lot of information out there. Also, you can find information on how to find an agent on the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America website. It has some information for that to help you. So check that out. Let's see here. What did I miss? Does DP in Deadpool Kills Marvel qualify as as a Rey Johnson? I don't know. I don't know how to answer that. I'm sorry, Kaku. I don't know what that means. Let's see here. I don't like the way the chat works on this. It jumps up too much. So congrats on writing your first book, though. By the way, that's a big accomplishment. I just read the first Dune book by Frank Herbert. Someone told me Paul Atreides was a Mary Sue. Nope. Yep, everything from his genetic potential, mental, physical prowess was explored. Yeah, and he had massive struggles. And then, of course, keep reading the series. He's not a Mary Sue. He's not a Rey Johnson. No way. Do you think any of modern resentment? See, people throw that stuff out there because they're annoyed that like they're trying to destroy the term rather than actually defend the characters like Rey. They're trying to destroy the term rather than to actually mount a defense. Super chat from Cyber Anime Alien. Do you accept the four-armed emperor as your savior and the one true God? Biomass for the hive mind. No, I don't actually know what you are referring to, though. So, the four-armed emperor. I'm not sure what you mean. I'm missing something. Sorry if I didn't get the reference. Do you think any of modern resentment for Mary Sue's comes with how overpraised young girls are relative to young boys? Possibly. I think some people have written some books on it. I can't say for sure, though. I have no idea. One of the best hopeless defense character archetypes is Setra the Imperishable, a mummy pharaoh who spits in the eye of God of Death when asked to serve him as a lieutenant. I don't know it. Have you managed to catch the Detective Pikachu trailer? Yes. I didn't want to watch it, but then I watched the Sonic trailer, and now I want to watch it. Glad you're going to watch episode 9 so I don't have to. I missed something. May I email you or post a link to The Shining? You can email me for sure. Stu@dvspress.com. An insane protagonist. This is named Rusty. It's Andrew. What do you think about the upcoming Star Wars game Jedi Fallen Order? I know nothing of it other than EA said that they weren't going to fill it with microtransactions, which means they almost assuredly are. So there's going to be a bunch of little DLCs that they'll sell, I'm positive, because they're liars. Have you ever read Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy? Nope. Commissar Caiaphas Cain isn't unlikable. He's just not what everyone thinks he is. I'll miss that. Have you ever read any Neil Stephenson books? Yes. They're good. I think. He wrote Snow Crash, right? I'm thinking of the same... Am I thinking of the right guy? Or am I thinking of a different guy? I like him. There's two Stevensons I'm thinking of. But I both like them. Thoughts on the after effects of midichlorians complaint? I found it funny when militant atheists complained about it in Star Wars before owning some crazy creationist on YouTube. I don't understand. Yeah, I never had a problem with midichlorians. I'm like, who cares? Whatever. It's an explanation of how things work. How do you make an unlikable main character interesting? I get why people don't like midichlorians, though, because it makes it from magic into something more less magical. So this happens whenever you explore magic system, things become less interesting rather than more so, because there's no mystery. How do you make an unlikable main character interesting? Say the main character is an arrogant, mean person. How does one make it interesting? Create some conflict in them that the reader wants resolved, especially a moral one. Like, you want them to be good. There's some redeemable quality to them, and you just want them to be good, and that's their journey. Let's see here. Since Lucas is a poor director when it comes to directing actors, what director would you like to see direct the prequels? I think, originally I think he was going to try to get like Steven Spielberg. Steven Spielberg is great at getting good acting out of people. So yeah, why not Spielberg? He's great. Actually, you know who's really good is James Cameron. James Cameron gets really good acting performances out of people, generally speaking. In fact, a lot of actors hate working with him because he'll make them do it like a take 100 times. Like, I think, like, there's all kinds of weird stories from some of his movies where he made actors do the take, over and over and over again until they got it right. He's kind of a perfectionist like that. So probably him. He might be good too. Do you think the overuse of Nazis as shorthand for authoritarian in movies is overused, and can it still be done well or cleverly? I think it's overused. I don't think it could be done well or cleverly by people today because they don't even know what Nazi means anymore. Do you think that the reason for all of these recent can-do-all characters are just created to appease the snowflake generation? Are they actually supposed to be seen as progressive? I think they're supposed to be seen as progressive because I don't think they please the millennials. And I have decided that millennials are not as bad as they're portrayed. That they got the short end of the stick in a lot of things. If you're annoyed at millennials who are taking classes on how to sew buttons onto clothing, you have to ask why their parents didn't teach them. They have to take a freaking class on, quote, adulting. Well, they weren't taught. Like, they weren't raised. They weren't parented. They're the daycare generation. So can you blame the daycare generation for not being parented and for not having life skills, for not understanding how the world works? Can you blame them for taking out $100,000 in student loans to get a women's studies degree because their teacher at public school told them that they have to go to college in order to make money, and they got to college and their college professor told them they needed to be a women's studies major, and they never ever had to consider the economics of it because they were never taught economics and their parents don't interact with them on it. No, it's not their fault. How much blame do you place on an 18-year-old, a fresh adult who can take out $100,000 in student loans on their backs as slavery, basically? I don't blame them that much. Like, here's the, who do you think's more to blame? If you have an 18-year-old girl who gets fed a bunch of cocaine and then gets promised thousands of dollars sometime in the future if they get into porno, do you blame the 50-year-old giving them the cocaine and making false promises, or do you blame the 18-year-old girl? I blame that 50-year-old giving them cocaine. That's what the modern academic institutions are. There's no parents for millennials, and the government had told kids that they have to go in and take $100,000 worth of debt out from banks to go and feed institutions. I think, I'm sorry for that rant, but just like, as time goes on, I feel more and more sorry for millennials in my generation, even though I have no student debt. And I was very well parented. you know. Other people were not, and I'm more and more aware of it. Super Jail Cases, when did you write your first book? My very first book I wrote when I was 19. I wrote my second book when I was like 29. Second and third book when I was 29. I picked writing back up. I used to do a bunch of writing in college. I gave it up for a long time, and then I came back to it. College is what you put into it. I was required to take some sociology classes, and those people wouldn't last in the upper division bio classes. Totally. College is what you get out of it, and most people don't do that because they're through an institution that everything's put in front of them. Everything's put in front of them, and they don't have to make any decisions. So they go to college, and they just want to go through whatever path is put in front of them. Jump through the hoops. Do you think it's better to create characters I want to create or try and make them progressive and woke in today's world? Make your own characters. People will become more attached to real characters versus woke, progressive characters. You'll get compliments on Twitter from wokeness, but you'll get sales from good books. Remember that. Readers are interested in good stories. Only the bloggers are interested in the politics. The bloggers don't control the readers. The readers act on their own. That's something that annoys the bloggers, the book bloggers. Lucas said studio executives don't know how to make movies. They don't. They think they do because they're running a company and having many films produced under their company. Yeah, it's true. They know how to manage who gets money, but they don't know how to make a movie. They have no idea, which is why big corporations are really bad at making good art. They're not good at it. You may need them to coordinate the money, but they certainly are not good at actually creating something that's artistic. Oh my gosh. Mahler is the unbridled rage guy. Never watched his videos, so I just don't know him. Sorry. I think I watched like part of a Star Wars video. I'm like, this guy's just saying my stuff back to me. I don't need to watch it. So that I don't really know any of the other people who talked about Star Wars because I don't watch their content. I know that maybe sounds weird, but I don't watch other people's content if it's the same as mine. I watch mostly like theology channels now and philosophy channels. I watch a lot of Catholic stuff. What are your thoughts on the matter of fantasy that focuses on the sublime and transcendent, like Lord of the Rings, versus fantasy that wallows in the muck and mire? I like both. It depends. So an idealist fantasy, I like a lot. I find it more appealing from an escapist perspective, whereas grimdark fantasy like Black Company or Game of Thrones is not really grimdark, but it's darker. I like that as well because it's more visceral. So it evokes different emotions. I like both. What do you think of Harry Turtledove's World War book series? He's the guy who wrote the thing where like the South Africans go back in time and make the South win the Civil War. I don't like his writing. And I don't really like him as a person, I think. I thought the setup for that was really stupid. I think I've ranted about it in previous streams or videos. And I also think it was like really ridiculous. Everybody's like an evil racist. And that's mostly what his books are about. And it's really stupid. I'm going to go back in time and give AK-47s. It's dumb. Do you feel like the sequel trilogy would have seen improvement had Finn been the primary focus and main character as opposed to Rey? Yes. Because Finn, and if they had actually made him like have PTSD, because Finn would have had a more interesting character base, but they didn't really do anything interesting with either one. They could have made Rey interesting too. Instead, they made her Rey Johnson. Who's your favorite Trek character? Picard? Data. I love Data. Data is somebody learning to be human. He's the Spock. He's like Spock, a great variation of Spock. The other one is Spock. I love Spock too. Clayton Payne says, I run a D&D game and find it funny how the players only like my non-important NPCs. I don't have a comment. Sometimes that happens. You can never quite be sure who people are going to like. Do you think Nazi imagery in young adult films is overused? I'm not aware of a lot of Nazi imagery in Harry Potter, but that could be because I know what Nazism is, and maybe it's just like too subverted, too like abstracted from what it is. Do you think it's a good way to introduce young people to controversial ideas? I don't think it is. I don't think Hunger Games uses Nazi imagery really either. That I I don't think it's Nazi at all. But that's because I know what the National Socialist German Workers' Party was. I think most people today, when they say Nazi, they don't know what that means. It's not just like they don't, they just use it as a poopy head comment. They don't know what it means. They don't have any idea what the National Socialist German Workers' Party was about, or what it did, or what it believed, or anything. Do you think Endgame will be nominated for Oscars? I do. I think it will be nominated for probably not Best Picture, though. They're not going to do that. It's not woke enough. But, like, it'll get nominated for, sound design and stuff like that. Yeah, for sure. Are you into martial arts or wuxia films? A little bit. I used to be. I haven't watched them in a long time. Yeah, Pete says, to bring up Star Wars argument, the problem with magic is once you know the magic, it's not necessarily magical, if that makes any sense. This creates what I call the what do I want to call it? I don't have a great name for it, but it exists in a lot of Brandon Sanderson books, so maybe we'll call it the Brandon Sanderson effect. Things start very interesting and then become less interesting as time goes on. As you discover more about the way the world works, which is one of your prime motivations for reading his books, because he does everything indirectly. All exposition is indirect in Brandon Sanderson books. By the time you get in whatever series, by the time you get to the end of the second book, you're kind of bored with it, because his characters often just aren't that good. They're not that interesting in and of themselves. And once you know everything about the setting, you're not that compelled to continue reading except to figure out the end of the plot. He does good plots. He does really good settings. But then he doesn't do great characters, generally. Like, I found the Oathbringer, the third Stormlight book, to be almost unreadable because it was so boring. And the second book was very boring. And the first book was great, but it's just kind of what happens. It's like, as you expose it, things become less magical. It becomes an alternative science, and then becomes a boring, well-defined piece of fantasy, And it's not to say all Brandon Sanderson books are boring completely, right? Like the original Mistborn trilogy is pretty good, even all the way through the third book. But definitely there's an effect in every Brandon Sanderson series where things start to get less interesting as they go. Doubling the workforce after World War II and making women workers very much broke the home. Now kids are at school more of their childhood than with their family. Pisses me off a bit. It's true. And the school is still constructed in an anti-family way, which is why kids don't go to, like, just think of this for a minute. And I'm sorry to get off topic and do another rant, but if you have kids and they come home and they have to do homework is the stupidest idea that anyone ever came up with, at least for kids. Because homework is, you're at school for this many hours, but the number of hours that you're at school is not enough hours for you to learn the material that you're required to learn. So you have to go home and continue learning more on your own. You have to do the individual practice on your own at home instead of on your free time. Well, if that amount of individual practice, if that amount of work, that amount of study is necessary, you need to just make the school day that much longer. If kids are expected to do 2 hours of homework a night, when I was a kid, my homework was like 2 to 3 hours of homework every single night, right? Which is stupid, right? Why not just have school go till 5 or 6 o'clock at night? And then parents could drop their kids off at school, pick them up after work. Why don't we do that? Like, homework is stupid. But yeah, get women out of the home. Now school is the same as like daycare from a parent's perspective. You have to keep both parents in the workforce to maintain any kind of living standard that's safe and appropriate for their family. It really sucks. It really sucks. No one can afford a home. All that's created through monetary policy. We could go on and on about that. I completely agree with your stance on millennials. It's so tragic. Yeah, I've completely reversed how I was. I stopped listening to the boomers complain about their kids that they didn't raise, and started thinking about being empathetic towards the human beings that I share my life with. I found out people consider 95 Gen Z. I am beaming with pride. Gucci gang, Gucci gang, Gucci Gucci gang. Pickle Rick. I'm not gonna lie. I don't know how I'm going to get out of this situation. I turned myself into a pickle. I found out people considered 95 Gen Z. I am beaming with pride. Gucci gang, Gucci gang. Pickle Rick. How long does it take for you to finish a draft of your book? Depends on the book. If I'm really consistent with it, 100,000 word book, 2 months. Right, 2 to 3 months. And then I'm working on, revising and publishing, doing all the other stuff. Sorry for the repeat question. I just asked twice because I thought you missed the first time. I might have. I don't know what the question was. If you don't put at David Stewart, I'm just going to skip what you're saying because there's too much chat. On resentment towards millennials, while they're the victim of their time, I think people need to dehumanize and alienate the SJW enemy to make it easier to fight them in their mind. Possibly. I mean, I don't believe in dehumanizing anyone. One of the things about SJWs is like you find that they're far rarer in the real world, and most people aren't walking around with like the Huffington Post screaming about it. They tend to do that on social media and not face to face, where they have to confront like actual people's real experiences, and they can't shirk away from a conversation. So the more time people spend in real life, the less SJW they become. And by real life, I mean the workforce and interacting with other humans outside of the academic environment. If they're in college, it's hell. There's no way that someone can live in hell and have their mind on heaven. They have to get out of hell first. What would be an ideal way to write a fantasy story in which the Norse or Greek pantheons are presented as non-deities and integrated into a world based on a Christian worldview? I have no idea how to answer that. You're going to have to figure that out for yourself because I haven't written that. Rey Johnson is an a-hole smug protagonist. A smug protagonist would be more interesting, like Holmes. I have no idea how to answer that. Film Girl says, no worries, I think your rant was welcome. I agree with you. I just think people today are too harsh on older films with certain stereotypes and themes for no reason. People are harsh on older anything for no reason. Because they don't, people have a 2019 PC standard for anything in the past. It doesn't work that way. Thanks a ton for being such a great encourager for those with narrative aspirations. I'm dusting off some ideas for novels that I stopped myself from finishing years ago. Good. I think you should work on it. Continue working. When you finally get to write the end, that's a great feeling, and it's a big accomplishment. Most people never write a book, and they never have abs. So if you've ever had abs and you've ever written a book, you're ahead of like 90% of people. Did you become a sedevacantist yet? Will you establish the anti-papacy in St. Louis? I'm not Catholic, so I can't really be a sedevacantist. I don't know. I don't quite know what to say about that. Because I'm not Catholic, I don't view like the papacy as being the office. I'm like, well, we could just depose the Pope. Let's fire him, right? But I can't really do that because of the way that it's set up, Sadly, I don't have Twitter. Maybe when I complete my books, I'll get one. Twitter, you can lose a lot of time on Twitter. I like Twitter, though. It's noisy in the way that I like. Can you be a non-evil racist? Did you read the long-awaited sequel to Kill a Mockingbird? I did not read the sequel of To Kill a Mockingbird because it seemed like I didn't read it. To Kill a Mockingbird's fine. I didn't read the sequel. I thought maybe the author, whose name escapes me for some reason, and I apologize, I should know it, but in the moment, sometimes you forget a bunch of stuff. I kept hearing this story about how she was like elderly abused into publishing it, and that she never wanted to really publish it. I don't know. Why do generational divides exist? From CS 499. I appreciate that. Teenagers dress the same as their parents in traditional cultures. It's a scheme that is propped up by mass media. Yeah. Why do generational divides exist? That's a great question. So they exist because one generation is not spending time with the previous generation. That's what we've established. So kids don't spend time with their parents. They go to school. So the generational divide is the difference between the home and the government school that the kid spends 20 years in. So counterculture exists because kids are not spending time with their parents. They're spending time with people that aren't their parents. Whereas in a really traditional culture, the family is front and center. Even in something like Japan where kids go to school, the family's never de-emphasized, not like it is in the US where If you're not, you go to school, then you go to soccer practice, then you go home and do homework, and you go to sleep. It's like you don't even interact with your parents. And I, even as a kid, and I consider myself parented, there was many times where I didn't talk to my parents for weeks at a time, especially as a middle schooler and teenager, because I had a bunch of stuff I was doing that wasn't my home. So of course I got into ideas that had nothing to do with reality. Whereas a medieval peasant spent all their time with their family. Medieval nobles spent all their time with their family. In all traditional cultures, you spent time with your family. So the generational divide didn't occur. It's a great, you have a really good point, CS, in that their parents, they dress the same as their parents in traditional cultures. It's because the family is no longer there. The family is whatever the government has. So you dress to impress your friends. And so if your friends are part of an anti-culture, then you need to be part of that anti-culture, because your friends are more important for your social survival in modern America than your parents are by a lot, right? If you don't have the right friends at school, you're going to get beaten up. And of course, I'm speaking primarily from a male perspective. Female perspective would be a little bit different. You'd have other social challenges besides physical violence. But certainly when I was growing up, it was kind of like prison. School was very, very similar to the way a prison yard was. Kids were not really policed. You ended up in fights a lot of times. There was cliques that hated each other, and you would get in fights with them. If you had no friends, chances are everyone would bully you and beat you up and steal your things from you. So you had to make whatever social connections you could. So if it meant if you had to wear like gang-like attire in order to have friends, you would absolutely do that, because the alternative was to be completely alone, isolated, and a perpetual victim. And maybe other people didn't have that experience. Maybe you had a similar experience. And like I said, I was on the better end of this. I knew kids that was way worse for them. So it's so much more important that you join whatever the culture of your peers is, rather than be part of the culture of your parents. And part of it is that we're too diverse in some other ways. There's a lot of cultural diversity that doesn't serve to create one cohesive continuation from one to the next. Can you be a non-evil racist? Yes. Like, racism is just an orthodoxy. It comes out of social proof, right? So yeah, you can be a non-evil racist. It just means, like, if you assume some race is bad, it doesn't mean you hurt them. Maybe you avoid them, right? It could be something that you overcome, right? It's a type of orthodoxy. Who is Rey Johnson? Rey Johnson is a Mary Sue. Your thoughts on Stefan Molyneux? I like Stefan, but he's way too big into IQ and hereditary IQ. He draws too many thin threads and basically uses it to try to hammer home ideas of race and ethnicity, certain races and ethnicities being inferior to others. And it's not really supported, as I understand it. Mainly because IQ doesn't function the way we think it does. Data from countries regarding IQ is not really correct, especially from third world countries. One example, this idea that IQ is entirely genetic. Well, it's like the IQ of West Africa is supposed to be like 60. Well, the IQ of Black Americans is like 90. That's the same genetic population, right? Black Americans are originally from West Africa. That's where the slaves were taken from. So if your environment has no effect on your IQ, then they would have a 60 IQ. But it doesn't happen that way. So it's more complex than that. And even then, IQ is like one small dimensional rating, a way of measuring cognitive ability among many things, and doesn't measure convexity and other things. I'm going to talk about convexity before we go. I'm starting to run out of time. So I like Stefan Molyneux. He makes lots of good arguments. His obsession with race and IQ is getting a little tired. I haven't watched one of his videos in months as a result. After the superhero movie craze dies down, what will take its place? No idea. It's going to be a black swan, though. We're not going to know. It's going to be something that's going to explode and surprise us, just like Twilight did. Sorry, I missed... Again, like, things jump down and I miss them. Thoughts on Walter John Williams? I don't really have any thoughts. I don't think I know who that is off the top of my head. Sorry. Do you prefer sci-fi or science fiction? I thought those are the same. Pete says, I apologize. I was going to get a drink for a sec, but did you say something about Malinu being a narcissist? I don't know if I don't think he suffers from narcissistic personality disorder. I don't think he does. If you call him arrogant, I mean, that's a natural defense for what you have to do in online, which is you're dealing with nitpickers and distracting bell ringers constantly. So you have to be pretty harsh on people. Sorry, let's get the super chat from Cyber Anime Alien. Here in the cult, family is the most important thing. Us hybrids value our pure strain brothers and our patriarch brood fathers. Consider joining. I have no idea what you're talking about. But I appreciate it. Joseph Feely, what would be the best narrative for Star Wars Episode 9? Rey had her mind wiped. She's recovering her memories. And we have to destroy the Emperor's ghost so he can't come back from undeath. There you go. 2 months for 100,000 words. It took me 4 summers to write my first book of approximately that length. So Southpaw Zero. I wrote Needle Ash. I don't have it here. I wrote the entirety of Needle Ash in 30 days. Actually, I wrote and published all 3 books in 60 days. So it's totally possible. You just have to do it every day. Just write 2,500 words a day. You'll be done in like 2 months. No problem. No problem. You know, no problem. 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 words. You can do it. I wrote all of Needle Ash I think I wrote the entire book in less than 6 weeks. And I took like 5 days off for Thanksgiving too. Bob, they are in the real world. I think you mean they aren't in the real world. You live in a nice part of the world, I guess. I live in California. So if I live in California and there's not a lot of SJWs in the real world, like real world people, they're really rare. You realize that like crazy feminists are mostly amplified online. And it's amplified by the media. They want that to be amplified. But real people are a little bit different. Even people who identify as feminists, which is like every woman that I meet, aren't really feminists the way that someone on Tumblr is. The Equalizer is a great 80s show. Sad you only know about the reboot movies. How long do you revise, edit, and polish the story to become better? Just depends on the story. If I do a really good job planning, it's a very short amount of time, a couple weeks. So Needle Ash, I started writing it. I planned the entire book November 1st, and I finished it like December 12th, I think, everything. And then I published all 3 books on like January 1st. So I still had Christmas and stuff in there. And I did significant revisions. It just depends on how efficient you are with that. If you've really planned your book well, there's not any structural revision, or there's very little that you have to do. Usually there's a little bit, like, you know, trim a chapter, cut a couple scenes, add a scene in. Most of your revision comes down to fixing copy editing stuff, tone, you know, making dialogue better, that kind of stuff. I'm slowly starting to realize that social media was a huge mistake. It was kind of, yeah. So all from our, just to finish up polishing the story, if you've written something and it's your first book that you've written, you will need to spend longer revising it. But I do recommend not to try revising it over and over again for years on end. Try to write something else and you'll learn some lessons that'll help you revise better, so you spend less time on it. Zoivod, there aren't SJWs walking around yelling. However, here in Canada, our polity is increasingly affected by SJW ideals. I know. From Breakfast Libertarian, was Francisco Deconia from Atlas Shrugged a Rey Johnson? I'm trying to remember the character. I don't think I remember. I don't think I remember well enough to answer. I'm trying to remember who he was. I haven't read it since I was a teenager. He was like he's like a CEO of a company or something. I don't know. I can't answer it. I'm sorry. Bob says, stop saying you're not a Catholic. If you keep watching Catholic videos on YouTube, what are you going to become Catholic and then become a sedevacantist? What kind of philosophical or theological ideas would you like to see more in media? I think the cross is just shorthand for a good guy martyr without any understanding of Jesus. Yeah. I'd like to see more thought about liberty. I'd like to see more Mel Gibson movies. The guy got it. High Reclusiarch says, cyber anime alien is a gene stealer cultist trying to seduce you into joining his bastard brood. By the Emperor, do not give in. Okay, so I think it's a Warhammer thing at this point. I don't know enough about Warhammer 40k. Obviously, you guys are more into it, so that means I probably need to know more about it. I liked playing the games. Do you see the video called The Failure of the Last Jedi? Nope. Sorry. Do you play any instrument? No. I play no instruments. I have never performed music in my life. Sir Tremendous, given the utterly destructive effects of modernity and the structuralization of nihilism, do you see our culture make any resurgence or continue its downward spiral? It will make I mean, everything occurs in cycles, right? Even the Romans came back eventually. So there'll always be a resurgence. Like it'll always come back around. It's just a question of how far it's going to go. I grew up with a big disconnect from my father, especially from Terrapar. He was always at work. I was always at school. It only became apparent as I got older how much I didn't actually know him. Yeah. I spent a lot of time with my father, especially as I got older. It's been all the way through. Spent a lot of time with my father. So, there's this scene in Avengers Endgame where Tony Stark meets his father, and it's a big emotional moment. And it kind of reminded me of stuff because my dad was killed unexpectedly too, and I only really understood how much my dad loved me once I had a son, and I love my son, right? And I spend all kinds of time playing with my son, and I remember how much time my dad spent with me, playing with Legos. I mean, he took me shooting every weekend. We went hunting together every single weekend growing up. I worked with him in his gunsmithing business. I spent a lot of time with my father. I will say that I had a very good relationship with my father. And that's probably protected me and inoculated me against a lot of things. But I remember that scene in Endgame being having a lot of effect on me, because if you've ever lost a family member very suddenly or had one get killed, it's a really big deal, the idea that you could go back and talk to that person, because you never get to say goodbye. When somebody leaves for work and never comes home, that's bad. It feels awful because there was no end to the relationship. So having Tony be able to go back and say the things he never got to say and think the things he never got to think, and that was a really powerful scene. And I think the whole movie was constructed around delivering those kinds of powerful scenes to the fans that they really wanted to see about those characters. So just a thought there. I'm really sorry that you didn't have a great relationship with your father, and I'm really thankful that I had one with mine. I kind of feel that way a little bit with my mom. My mom was working a lot, and I just didn't have as good a relationship with her as I had with my father. But I think it's not uncommon. A lot of people feel that way. And also the idea, people want to go back to the 50s where the father still worked outside the home. In the medieval period, children worked alongside their father and their mother. People were in contact with their parents all the time. Harwick, regarding generational divide, I grew up homeschooled with my parents being my only major peers. Yet still have some different tastes and opinions than them. Yeah, well, you're a different person. You're always going to be a different person than them. But actually, that makes me think of another thing. We do have a culture of liberty, of personal liberty. which means you're going to allow your children to be more autonomous and be their own people. You're not going to force upon them dressing and acting and thinking like you as much as maybe some other cultures. Film Girl, have you ever watched the Twilight films or read the books? Just curious. I will. I'm going to, and I'm going to report on it for you guys. I really want to, not because I think they're good. I read the first 40 or 50 pages of the first book, and oops, that was what was in my toes. A lute string. Gotta clean up your lute strings, guys. I want to read them because I just want to see why people liked them, and so I got to read them, and I got to know what's in there. Even if they suck, even if I don't like the way they're written, if I don't like the prose, if I think it sucks, there's something in there that lots of people liked, so I got to figure out what caused the Black Swan. Thoughts on Gene Wolfe, author of the Black Sun series of books. He died recently. I don't really. I'd have to stop and think more about it. I'm not gonna do that one offhand. I didn't know he died. You have any thoughts on moral codes of superheroes in the modern age? Yeah, I think most stories are trying to get them to abandon their moral codes. I think it's more interesting when they have a conflict with them. I like that. What do you think of Pope Francis? He says some wacky things. I think he's borderline anti-pope. He, certainly speaking as a private theologian, he says some things that I think are abhorrent. And he also interferes with the politics of other countries in ways that is bad, including like giving money to like migrants to try to make them enter the U.S. illegally, which is an international crime, some would say. Let's see here. Have you ever sketched out your characters from your stories? I find it easier to describe something when I draw it and then write it out. I have, but I don't do it currently. I just write some basic traits on a paper and I imagine it. Some people like to draw it. It's all how you creatively want to visualize that person, you know. So I've done it in the past. I don't really do it now, though. Do you have any thoughts on prequel memes? I love them. Ironic. Gibson is going to make a sequel to Passion of the Christ about Jesus' resurrection. Maybe about the Acts. Like, that would be great. A movie about Acts. You know, that's something we focus on. We focus on the crucifixion and the life of Jesus, and we don't think about the acts that followed, which are really cool too, and really important as well. 40K is a really rich fictional universe with some excellent stories. I think you just like it, a blend of history, theology, sci-fi, fantasy, and just about everything else. 2020 predictions. Also, thoughts on the Yang Gang phenomenon. Real deal or just shitposting relentlessly? Is Yang Gang the real deal? I don't know. I haven't been following that closely for 2020. It depends on if the mainstream media gains or loses power in the next year. If they continue to lose power, then I think Trump will win. If they somehow gain power by shutting down more Alex Joneses and stuff, then, I don't think he'll win. I think it really has to do with who's going to control the narrative in the states where the votes are up for grabs. Obviously, it doesn't matter what people in California think, including me, because it's going to go to the Democrats. In fact, some people have actually proven that if it weren't for illegal voters in California would have gone to Trump. But it doesn't matter because no one here is going to change that. The state's controlled from the top to the bottom by crazy people, I'll say. Not my local town. My town's great. I hate to say this, but I did not like Endgame. I hated the time travel. I hated Hulk being afraid of his own rage. I hated Thor being a fat Lebowski and much more. I liked Thor being a fat Lebowski. I like Thor as a humorous character much more than him as a serious character. Other people may disagree with me on that, but I think he's way funnier as comic relief. He's way better. I just like him so much more. So he was still a badass even as a fat guy. He was awesome. He was more like a power lifter, more like World's Strongest Man, not so much like a chiseled bodybuilder. Meals Beast. I worked with my dad in his business too. He died 3 years ago, and I'm so grateful I got to spend so much time with him too. He's one of my best friends. Yeah, mine too. I'm sorry for that. That in-game scene made me cry. Yeah, it was a really good one. That's the whole movie. It was built around those scenes. And that's what made it great to me. Myers does good world building. When do you think Star Wars films should have ended? After episode 3, but I don't know. I don't think they should have ended. I think we could have kept making good ones. Matthew Lee, a lot of people think that extreme fan culture is weird. Weeaboos, crazy Marvel fans. Do you think it's a thing, and does it concern you? PewDiePie says he thinks Marvel fans are creepy. So, no, fans are not a problem. But within any fandom, you get a couple crazy people, right? So the problem is you don't want to argue from the margins. You don't want to judge an entire fandom by somebody who's really crazy. And the thing is, I know people who've had $100,000 Star Wars collections. They're not crazy people. There's things they collect, and they're Star Wars, right? Other people collect guitars, like me. Other people collect guns. Other people collect knives. People collect different things, and so people are really into Star Wars. They like collecting those toys. It's an enjoyment for them. They like that. That doesn't mean there's something weird about them, right? They're normal people. They don't collect stamps. They collect Star Wars toys. But then there's always like some extreme people who like are going overboard, doxing people on Twitter, calling people's employers when somebody puts out a negative review of something, or employers that I no longer work for, that kind of stuff. I try not to judge people who like the sequels. Every person I've met who liked the sequels was kind of crazy, but that's because of that filtering. Anybody who's normal, I don't talk to about it because they're just normal people. What do you think of Sam Raimi's view that movie heroes get admiration from audiences, whether or not they earn it, which prompted him to ensure that his Spider-Man earned all he got? I think that's a good thought. I like that. I like that approach. You want people to earn admiration, which means you have to create obstacles. You have to have them make bad choices and recover. Yeah. Have you ever seen The Deluge? I haven't. Couldn't they have just healed Iron Man? I remember Black Panther in his film having one of those healing bead things. Couldn't they use it or use Strange's magic to heal? I don't know. I don't think so. The point is, that's the end of his journey. He died of gamma ray poisoning. Favorite romantic era composer? Carl Maria von Weber. Who else? Probably Carl Maria von Weber. Probably my favorite romantic era composer. I really love his music and his operas, especially. Die Freischütz is one of my favorites. And it depends where you put like romantic and post-romantic before you start getting to like Brahms and Wagner. I like Wagner a lot too. Wagner's great. There's so much good stuff in the romantic period. I would say Hector Berlioz, but he just wasn't as productive as Weber. So it's Weber wins it. He's great. Just like, I don't know, there's it's hard to pin down. Der Freischütz is a great place to start. If you've never seen a production of Der Freischütz or you've never listened to it, get out the libretto and listen to it, watch it. You can get a translation online for free. It's a great version of the German romantic ideals. This focus on the folk and a folk tale. There's a deal with the devil. The music's just beautiful. The portrayal of the devil, some of the scenes, it's just frightening how scary the music sounds. And then it's almost, it's tragic. It has a great tragic irony towards the end. They still do a happy ending. It's a great place to start with romantic era opera. And there's so much good romantic opera that you can watch, whether it's German or Italian, French. There's lots of good stuff. Not too many English operas, but it's all good. The Action Brick, in-game spoilers. What are your thoughts on them using 2014 Thanos instead of our Thanos? Oh, they used it. I don't know. I think it was fine to have him go forward in time. Somebody pointed out in one of the comments on one of my other videos that like the reason Thanos destroyed the gems, the Infinity Stones, is because he knew he himself would be tempted to try to revise what he did. And that's exactly what his past self does. Is he's like, I'm going to destroy the entire universe now. I'm going to bring all life down to the lowest level and make new life with the stones because of the temptation of power. So it's a little bit of Ring of Power thing, and I think that's a good way of looking at it. Let's see here. Any favorite new characters from recent books, comics, movies, or games? I don't know. Recent stuff. You know, I don't know. It depends on how much you consider recent. Like Malazan Book of the Fallen. It's hard. Things have to kind of digest a while. I really liked Kaladin in the first Stormlight Archive book. He was a great character. After that, less likable. Oh, I missed a super chat from Kaku. Twilight series. Vegan vampires goes exactly in real life. Decay, mental illness, no tea, weirder fetishes, right brain pornography, no plot in sight. I'm still going to read it, man. And if that's what I have to, if I just have to read your comment as a video, then that's what we'll do. Let's see here. There's often a reputation that nerds are not sociable. What do you think about that? I'm sure that there are a lot of people that have good social skills and are big in nerd culture. I think nerds are totally sociable. The thing is it depends on which perspective you're judging them, right? So I talked about this in the Virgin Chad video, right? A lot of nerds are virgins, not literally, but they're gamma males, or they're like lower. They're just lower on the socio-sexual hierarchy. And so if you're someone in the middle, you're going to view them as somehow not sociable because they're not as socially successful as someone else, like especially in like a high school situation. But, you know, nerddoms are their own social organizations in some cases. The other problem with the idea of nerd culture is that there is nerd culture. Star Wars is the biggest film franchise in the history of the world. You shouldn't be a nerd for liking Star Wars. That doesn't make any sense. Likewise, most people play Dungeons and Dragons at some point. You're not a nerd for playing Dungeons and Dragons.
Look at this.
Whoa, what'd you get, bud?
I get a a soul lollipop of Oma.
That's really cool. Where did you get this? Oma gave that to you?
Mm-hmm.
Can I see it? You're going to show it? You want to show it to the people? Here, look. You can see yourself. Where's the camera? Here it is. Look, there you are. You going to show it? See the road rash on my kid's face? Isn't that beautiful? He fell down in the parking lot the other day. Promise I don't abuse my kids. So look at this dinosaur. It's a dinosaur. Are you going to eat it? We'll have to unwrap. You have to have Mommy unwrap it for you.
We'll have to say we're saving it till tomorrow. I don't know.
You're saving it till tomorrow?
Because we have lots of treats today.
Oh, really?
What did you have at Target?
Oh, what is this?
What's what?
What is this?
Godzilla?
I don't know, what is this?
That's the lava man.
Oh. Hey, what is it? Wait, those are mine.
No, they're his hands.
Wait, I need them to... No! They were mine.
Don't take his hands away. We don't want to lose them. Godzilla.
What did you get at Target, Ron? What treat did you get at Target? The spot cookie.
You got a cookie?
It's a spot cookie.
A spot cookie. How's the baby? Here, let me see the baby.
Just a little grumpy.
All right. Come here, grumpy Gus. Let's show the people the baby.
Oh, you're still on it?
Yeah,
Sorry.
I'm trying to get off. Sorry. It's going a little bit long. There's the baby. All right, cutie. Are you going to show how cute you are? Hi. My name is Aurelia, and I'm really cute. I'm going to stick my tongue out just a little bit because I don't like to be held by my armpits. So here I am. I'm getting very chunky on the milks. Yeah? You see the light? Oh, you see yourself? There's a baby there, huh?
Oh, hi, Aurelia.
Okay.
Hey, Dad, what is this kind of bed?
What's what?
That kind of bed.
Oh, that's Twilight Force. Isn't that your favorite band?
Mm-hmm.
You installed this one.
Mm-hmm.
Can you sing a Twilight Force song?
How can you sing it?
You know these ones.
Daddy,
What's your favorite Twilight Force song?
I like Gates of Glory.
Gates of Glory.
So, Daddy, how can you sing? Daddy, sing it. Sing it.
You want me to sing it?
Mhm.
I thought you were gonna sing it. What does
No.
it sound like?
No, it doesn't sound like anything. I want you to just read it.
You want to read it?
No, you just sing it.
Here's their map. Do you want to see their map?
Mhm. Okay, let me see the map. So here's the dragon. And what is this?
That's called the compass. It shows which direction is north.
And what is this?
That's a lake.
And what is this?
That's a mystic portal. I don't know where that goes.
I think it goes to here.
Oh, it goes over to Battleheim.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. I got to finish my show.
Go finish your show.
All right. Love you, bub.
I love you too.
All right. Sorry about that. Robert Downey Jr. always gives a fantastic... I'm going to try to finish up the chat. I'll do my argument and get out of here because it is actually way late. I've gone way, way over because of how much chat there is. So I really apologize if I didn't get to your chat. We'll just try to get to it next time. Already gotten Sociable Nerds. Film Girl says, so sweet, now I'm broody. You got to find a good man. They're out there. Trust me. I know some. Let's see here. What did I miss? Do you have any thoughts on the possible Pirates of the Caribbean reboot? It's inevitable. I think it's unneeded and it's unneeded and it is too soon, but it's inevitable. Hollywood only bets on sure things. They're very risk averse when you stop and consider and evaluate it. So it's inevitable because it's just IPs are assets, and when IPs are assets, you need to use them. You're not going to make a lot of money selling Blu-rays of old movies. So it's artistically, it's not necessary, but it's a possibility to make more money, so they're going to do it. Matthew Lee says he likes the DCEU, even Justice League. I think they explore interesting philosophy and theology, especially in Batman vs. Superman. Do you find it thoughtful or pretentious? Does it set apart from Marvel? I think it's very different from Marvel. It's good in its own way, but I mostly feel like it's missed potential. Good night. I hope you see CGI Sonic in your nightmares. Oh, I already have. The funny thing is, when Star Wars first came out, it was attacked for dumbing down and making sci-fi too mainstream. I could see that. What are your thoughts on Fritz Lang's Metropolis? Love it. And would you be interested in ever making a video? Yes. I will probably do that eventually because it's great. Oh, it's a very chilling visual presentation. Because of your kid, I'm going to go out and check out Twilight Force. They're great. They're one of my favorite bands. They're awesome. The Compass is a lie made up by big maps. Do you ever think we may be entering a post-great franchises era of entertainment in an age of mass consumption where people have an overabundance of choice? So if you look back in time, you'll see their cycles. So the 50s and 60s, they had all these... Basically, it was like this, but with lower technology. 3D movies... Revenge of the Body Snatch, like stuff that's really pulpy, just there to make money. Then you had the 70s, kind of as a reaction, you had more focus on the artists, the directors and writers. And then you got the high budget film out of that, and that dominated the 80s and 90s to a lesser extent. And then we've ended up with this other era where we're just juicing old stuff, kind of like the 50s and 60s. So it'll come back around. So we'll exit this and we'll enter... If history is going to be repeated, we'll enter a period where things are a little bit more spread out and there's more one-offs and there's more, just a lot more diversity because you can't count on making money by remaking Total Recall again or again and again and again and again, So that'll be interesting. Thoughts on the following. Medieval fantasy set in European medieval version of modern America. Texas divided among football fiefdoms. Founders worshipped like a pagan pantheon. Wasn't that... I think that was... Never mind. Yeah. Cool. Do it. Why is that there though? Did they colonize? Did the Romans colonize America? So maybe like the Romans colonized America and it created its own thing over there. That'd be cool. That'd be fun. That sounds like something Michael Moorcock would do. He had alternate versions of Europe. Like if you read Hawkmoon, it's a really weird alternate version of Europe, and I really like it. So check that out if you want a different weird version of that. To be fair, though, I do want 6 kids. I need to get a move on. Yes. I recommend you go to church. Like people are always like, "Hey, how do I find a good woman?" It's like, where are you picking them up? It's like, I don't know, Tinder and bars. It's like, I don't know. I don't think the good ones are hanging out there. You know, of course, I met my wife in college, right? We were both music majors. It's like, I'm like, don't major in music. It's like, well, me and my wife both have music degrees. But yeah, that's how we met. And then we, of course, like my wife is a speech pathologist now, which turns out, you know, vocal studies actually a good background for that too. All right, so let me close this up with your weekly argument. I'm way out of time, so I'm going to make this one short. It's called convexity. Convexity is something that has to do with data and with consequence that people often don't think about when they are considering statistics. So convexity means that there's more focus on something that's small. Think of a convex lens. It's thin on the edges and it's fat in the middle, versus something that is very spread out. Great example is Russian roulette. So if you're playing Russian roulette, you put a bullet in the chamber, you have 6 chambers, you have a 1 in 6 chance of dying. Somebody who doesn't understand convexity, which is going to be most people talking about statistics in the mainstream media or probably just in general today, will view that as like, well, you have an 85% chance of winning. So why aren't you playing Russian roulette? You'd be a sucker not to play this 85% chance of winning. That's great. It's like, but the convexity on the consequence of losing is significant. So it's an upside, but the downside is you're dead. So there's an intense convexity when you're playing Russian roulette. This obviously translates to lots of different things, right? So when it comes to making mistakes in life or in YouTube or anything else, it's better to make lots of small mistakes than big mistakes. So you want to exercise optionality that has convexity in your favor, meaning maybe there's a 1% chance of success, but the big success is very big, versus there's a 20% chance of success, but the failure will ruin you. So things which cause utter ruination are convex. Maybe there's a very small chance that okay, we're going to create a flu vaccine. And there's a very tiny, very small chance that it create a super flu that'll kill everybody. But usually it's just going to create a vaccine that's not going to hurt anyone. It's like, well, you still shouldn't do it. Because that tiny small downside, this is where arguing from the margins would actually be valid, as some people pointed out. It more than makes up for all the positive gain that you get. That's convexity. And it's something that you can find a lot in data. Or you can find a lot missing from data. And you have to look very close to find convexity effects. IQ is a good one if you come back to IQ. So IQ doesn't test for convexity. It tests for accuracy in time. It's just like kind of computational power, right? That's how you could think of IQ. So a person who thinks slower but makes less mistakes, I put this out on Twitter. Would you have, let's say you gave a standardized math test to your employees, and one person, it's 100 questions and it's timed. One candidate answers 100 questions and he gets 80% of them right. You'd be like, oh, that's a B. The other person answers 50 questions and gets 50 of them right. That's an F. He only got 50% on the test. Which one do you hire? Well, if convexity is an issue in your business, you hire the person who got 50%. Because the fact that they attempted 50 and got 100% on them and made no mistakes is more important than their computational speed. So the person who computed faster and made more mistakes is a bigger liability. If he makes a computational error when billing a customer, it could cost your company a lot of money, not just in terms of not charging enough, but also you overcharge and you end up with a lawsuit or something like that. So convexity is something that exists in the real world, but it's not replicated well on standardized tests, which means standardized tests are single dimensional. So an IQ test really is only going to test one dimensionality of intelligence, quote intelligence. It's not a full measure of intelligence. It can't be, because it's really hard to test certain things that really matter. So if a person you can have a math major with an average IQ who is a better mathematician than a math major with a very high IQ, simply because the one with the average IQ doesn't make any mistakes. They go slow enough that they check all their work as they go, and so their accuracy is higher. Depending on what you're doing, the higher accuracy is far more important than the computational speed, but it depends on what you're doing. If you're really creative, an IQ test doesn't really measure creativity well. There might be a correlation, like I'm really creative, I also do really well on standardized tests, maybe there's a correlation there, but you can't really test my ability to synthesize and reorganize ideas on the fly, especially really more extreme combinations, because that's a convexity function, right? A really good idea, it's easier to come up with 100 bad ideas than one really good idea. So how do you exercise convexity in your life? Well, you set things up so that most of your decisions have a really good positive payoff, but maybe not a big negative payoff. An extreme example would actually be a too extreme an example would be the lottery. $5 is not a big loss to you. The $10 million you gain if you win is a big gain, but the chances of you winning are zero, right? So you want something with better optionality than that. Like, if I buy this stock and the stock goes down, if I buy a $10 stock and I lose $10, no big. But if it goes up to 100, I've gained a lot. So a lot of people, when they gain in portfolios, it's gaining from a small number of investments. And when you say, if you're making YouTube videos, you make a bunch of 5-minute videos. They're low investment and they have a big potential payoff. So if you look at the way my videos are, it's like all my videos have like 5,000 views, except for the ones that have like 500,000. Those are the black swans. So you set up a bunch of videos that maybe they'll be big, maybe they won't. And then one of them, for whatever reason, it hits the audience and it hits the algorithms right and it explodes and it makes a bunch of money. That's how you end up playing the content game. It's by exercising convexity, opening yourself up to the possibility of positive convexity, while the negative convexity is hardly minimal. What I lose if only 1,000 people watch a video, I've only lost my time. Whereas if 100,000 people watch the video, I've gained a lot more than what my time was worth, right? And so it ends up averaging out to be a gain, an average gain that's pretty good. Okay, so that's my my weekly logic is to think about convexity. Convexity effects are usually ignored when people isolate data. They don't think about how meaningful a success is, or how meaningful a failure is, or how big the failure is. If you go to a casino and you leave with zero money, that's a loss of everything. That's a more convex effect than if you go to a casino and win $100. So if I go in with $1,000, I win $100. I'm like, I didn't lose my ass at the casino. I go into a casino, I lose $1,000. It's a bigger loss, and that's the main thing I want to get across. So be aware of it. People almost always ignore those. Okay, so that's going to be it for today. Film Girl says, I come to America to find a good church. So Catholics, you need to go give her messages and invite her to your church. And I'll see you guys next time. I think there might be positive. Yeah, okay. All right, that's it for today. And have a good one. Newest book, 2-hour reading experience is this guy right here. This is Crown of Sight. It is a high fantasy novella. It's very fun. It's very quick and easy to read, very full of action, and there's also some important philosophical ideas when it comes to rewriting history and rewriting memory and what memory and history really mean. Of course, Water of Awakening. I think the trial run of getting this on my mailing list for free. If you don't have this one yet, I can just give you a copy. Just let me know. As far as an ebook, this is a cool one. It's a very big adventure fantasy. Big journey, big return, big growth. Also interesting philosophy in this one, if you like that one. And then, of course, my classic Muramasa Blood Drinker, if you like samurai fiction. So check those books out, and I will see you guys next time.